3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning indeed to you. A strange day today, perhaps. The PMQs is on the way, the deputies. Dominic Raab still accused of serial bullying by a number of colleagues, and indeed the most senior civil servant in the Foreign Office when Dominic Raab was there has joined that chorus of criticism. He will be deputising for Rishi Sunak, who was hoping to suck up to Xi Jinping, the Chinese Premier, today, but that meeting has been cancelled. Some fears in some quarters that the naivety David Cameron displayed towards China has been repeated by Rishi Sunak. And then, of course, I don't know whether you remember this, but I couldn't help thinking that the missiles that landed on Polish soil in the context of the Ukrainian war on the day that Donald Trump announced he's going to have another crack at the presidency of America just reminded me, do you remember that time that Donald Trump threatened to withhold $400 million worth of aid to Ukraine that had already been approved by Congress unless Volodymyr Zelensky would collude in one of his crazier conspiracy theories? Do you remember that? It's amazing how quickly we forget, isn't it? I mean, the thing with Trump was that he was so utterly corrupt and disgusting as president that you sometimes struggle to remember the finer details of each example. $400 million of Congress-backed aid had already been greenlit by Congress. And Trump essentially put the frighteners on Volodymyr Zelensky and threatened to withhold it unless Zelensky joined in with some of the crackpot conspiracy theories that Trump was desperate to inflate in the hope of avoiding defeat in an election that he subsequently lost but still denies he lost. How the hell that man can even be permitted to throw his hat back into the ring, let alone get a chance of some serious support from Republicans, is a question that we'll probably turn our attentions to in the second hour. In fact, we'll probably do a coma question. It's something that I have to keep in reserve. I don't want to overdo it because although it makes my life quite easy, I think it probably is a little bit lazy. But the question of how a man who essentially unleashed a violent mob who were baying for the blood of his own vice president, how he can still be in a position to contend for the presidency that he not only lost, but continues to deny that he lost. I mean, it is, when you think about it, incredible. But anyway, like I said, the second hour. Mould. I'm going to say something a bit strange. I have been trying lately to muster up some sympathy for people we would loosely describe as being anti-vaxxers. And by sympathy, I simply mean understanding, rather than the knee-jerk criticism. I've been trying to work out how people could have ended up in such a weird place. I don't mean people who get paid to punt these pungent opinions, all right? I'm afraid that's a fairly clear motivation. You know why people who are not really capable of achieving much in the context of reality start peddling myths and unreality, and they get attention, and they get work, or they get money, or they get their PayPal or their Patreon, and you can give them. So I know why people lead on these lies, but people who follow, and maybe to a tiny degree, some of the people that lead on it as well. And the most sympathetic thing you can say about these people is that they've been often profoundly let down by the medical establishment. If you've been profoundly let down by the medical establishment, that can be an entire ethnicity of people. Some of the medical experimentation that was done on people of colour historically has created a sense of scepticism in communities that is well-founded. You know, it is built on something valid, although what is then built upon the valid foundations can be completely specious, as we've seen. The experiments in particular on men with syphilis in the United States of America in the last century were hideous. I mean, truly, truly hideous. And I get that. I can understand how if you've been on a personal level or on a community level, you've been horribly let down by the, quotes, medical establishment, end quotes, then you will take that skepticism to the next story and the story after that and the story after that. And I suffer from, or I certainly used to suffer from, the idea that doctors were almost beyond reproach. It's an incredibly dangerous position, this, because they're not. The best thing you can do if you suffer from the belief that doctors are beyond reproach is hang out with some doctors. Because as with every other line of work, they're just like you and me. Everything, whether it's radio presenters, nuclear physicists, politicians, doctors or bus drivers, we are all more or less the same. If you've put 100 bus drivers in a room, some of them are going to be idiots and some of them are going to be the coolest people you'll ever meet in your life. You put 100 radio presenters in the room, some of them are going to be idiots and some of them are going to be me. You put 100 politicians in a room, then you might find a decent one if you're lucky. You put 100 doctors in a room, some of them are you don't have to go to the extremities of Harold Shipman to remind yourself that there is no guarantee whatsoever that doctors are going to be good. And they do this thing, doctors. You put 100 landlords in a room, and some of them are going to be decent and some of them are going to be dodgy. But doctors, and I think I understand why, they hate anything. Many doctors, not all doctors, but a lot of doctors hate anything that sort of challenges what they already know. They're not good at paradigm shifts, doctors. They're certainly not good at massive change. Long COVID, for example. There's a lot of scepticism around long COVID because we didn't study it at school. We didn't do it at medical school. And I think, and I fully confess that this is a bit uncharacteristic for me. It's a bit of what we call a flyer, this is. But I have some knowledge of this issue, some fairly unpleasant knowledge of it, to be honest with you. I think mould and conditions that are brought on by mould might be a major undiscovered scientific frontier. So a lot of it is known. It is known that the spores produced by some moulds can prompt reactions in some people, particularly younger people. It's a fairly simple relationship between inhaling spores and having some form of allergic reaction. But they can be much bigger than that. If you've got asthma or eczema, you're at particular risk. But I just think that mould is perhaps at the root of more than we realise as a population. In America, they're a lot further down the line on this than we are. And that's why if I had any agency whatsoever, if I had any power whatsoever, I think that I would be prioritising the removal of mould from accommodation, from living accommodation, 100 times more than is currently the case. Is currently the case. Why has Steve sent me a message about number 13 Keppel Road being full of mould in the cellar? It's not where I used to live, is it, Steve? I lived on Keppel Road in Chorlton-cum-Hardy for a year. It was certainly nothing to do with me if it was mouldy, but I don't think I was at number... I can't remember what number I lived at. Why are you giving me that detail? It's a bit odd. This story broke my heart yesterday. It doesn't happen very often that I can't bring myself to cover a story live. I think in normal circumstances, halfway through yesterday's show, we'd have had a little bit of a change of course, and we would have talked about little Awab Ishak, who was 2 years old when he died from a respiratory condition in 2020 caused by mould in the flat where he lived. I couldn't do it. I don't know why. Are you like this? I can talk about some things that are utterly harrowing, and I'm okay with it. I'm not happy about it, but I can keep the angst at bay. And then some stories, usually involving little children, I think. And a photograph can do it sometimes. You can read a story and you'll be fine, and then you'll see a picture, in this case of a little lad smiling at the camera a few days before his second birthday, and you have to really marshal your forces not to let the tear ducts take over. It just ripped me, this story. Yes, I don't know if you could possibly listen back to yesterday's programme. You might even be able to identify the moment when I started reading about it. And I couldn't talk about it on air. It just broke me. It broke my heart completely because the details are unbelievable. This is the United Kingdom. What are we at the moment? 6th, 7th largest economy? 5th still? We've probably dipped a bit, haven't we? We don't need to explain why. Let George Eustace do it later. But the idea that we live in a country where the Prime Minister's wife is as rich as Croesus. You know, the Prime Minister's wife is from one of the richest families in the world. And yet, in the country that he governs, although he wasn't in charge in 2020, a little boy can die because his home is mouldy. And it's not dirt, by the way, this. I nearly said filthy there, but it's not dirt. You can clean until your fingernails are raw and not get rid of the moulds that cause spore. You can clean black mould with bleach. I told you I knew more about this than is normal, but you can clean black mould with bleach. But you don't remove the problem completely with certain types of mould unless you have your cellar tanked, unless you have the room tanked. You literally make it almost airtight with ventilation. It's quite an expensive job. And I know about this because some friends of ours had it done, and the bloke that tanked the cellar got sick. They were convinced that the illness in their family was being caused by mould. They did a lot of research in America which confirmed their fears. So they paid, I think, £8,000 to have a cellar tanked, to have it sort of lined and rendered almost airtight, because you can't, once it's in there, there's not a lot you can do. It can get behind floorboards. You have to, it is incredible. Think of it like pollen. Right? I mean this, I've given this a lot of thought, but think of it like pollen. So you might not suffer from a pollen allergy at all. But you might have a sister or a friend who can walk under a plane tree and their nose explodes. There's one tree in Chiswick that, I don't know why this is. It must have something to do with seasons and something to do with spores, pollen. It was about a month of the year when if I walk up a certain part of Chiswick High Road, my nose explodes. I start sneezing, it starts running, and then another 100 yards up the road and I'm fine again. It's the strangest thing. It's only happened to me 4 times. Goodness knows what the conditions are that prompt this response. But nobody else around me at that moment is suffering in the same way. So think of it like that. These are the worst things for governments to get a grip with, for societies to get a grip with. I think apart from the fact that only last week Conservative MPs were publicly stating that anybody from overseas who has made a home here should shut up about the conditions and never ever complain. I might remind you of the names of some of them shortly, and maybe we'll give them a ring and ask them how they feel about people like Awab's dad phoning up to complain about their living conditions. But the worst thing for societies are conditions that aren't equal. Long COVID and ME are good examples. Unless you fear it could happen to you, or unless it can happen to you, we don't feel the same sense of urgency, do we? And that's why these stories are so heartbreaking, because most people living in a home with the kind of mould that they had in Awab's house are going to be fine. It's weird, but true. Or many people are going to be fine, especially if you sort of stay on top of the visual signs of it. But some people are going to get really, really ill, and some people, like Awab, are going to die. It's incredible, isn't it? 10:16 is the time. Should we do a quick hit in Idiot's Corner? I don't suppose you will mention that a Labour council is in charge in Rochdale, will you, James? Imagine that. We're talking about a dead 2-year-old boy. And our Gamini friend here thinks that it's a suitable moment to talk about the political allegiances of the council. It doesn't matter who the council were. It's disgusting what's happened to this family. It's disgusting that politicians stood up last week saying people from overseas shouldn't complain about their living conditions. They should be grateful for whatever they've got. They happened to be Tories. That's a Tory point of view. But the idea that I wouldn't mention what see, that's projection there. You're thinking, well, if I was talking about a 2-year-old boy on the radio, I probably wouldn't mention that the council were Conservative because I'm a ghoul. I'm a Gamini ghoul. And I think everyone else is as dismal and as gross as I am. What a strange thing to say. Anyway, an early visit to Idiot's Corner for our friend there, suggesting that I won't mention that a Labour council is in charge. And oops, I just did. Idiot. Can we do the how of it today? How does this happen? The chief executive of Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, which is a social housing provider, has been accused of hiding behind procedure. Michael Gove has summoned him to a meeting in London, saying, "We all know that local authorities are facing challenging times when it comes to finance, but frankly, that is no excuse." The lad's dad, Faisal Abdullah, had repeatedly raised the matter with the social housing provider, but no action was taken. On one occasion, he was told simply to paint over the mouldy area. How does this happen? Knowing what you know, okay, understanding what you understand, seeing what you see. how did this happen? And don't hate me, but fair play so far to Michael Gove for this response. When you've got a situation where you have a young child in a house that is unfit for human habitation, it is a basic responsibility of the local authority, but particularly the housing association, to make sure that people are in decent homes. I hope Michael Gove will be talking to his colleagues who were last week suggesting that people who've made their homes here after fleeing troubles should shut up and never complain about their conditions. They should be grateful for whatever they've got. One of them claimed his own constituents would be delighted to live in the Manston processing centre, didn't he? I must get the names of these people. All this whataboutery, all this, oh, if only we had more government money. Do your job, man. Honestly, it beggars belief that this guy is still in office. He is coming here in order to explain to me why it was that this tragedy was allowed to happen. Downing Street said, "We will no longer stand for unresponsive landlords failing in their response to tenants." Here's the thing, right? I don't think this is rare at all. I think this is a daily occurrence in housing authorities and private landlords up and down the country. You ring up your landlord and tell him your bathroom's full of mould. The idea that he's going to send someone round to spend thousands of pounds on tanking the room or really getting to the source of the problem is pie in the sky. I don't even think this guy's conduct is particularly freakish or extraordinary. I think this is probably commonplace, but I don't know, and you do. So call me on 0345 6060 973. It's 10:19. 23 minutes after 10 is the time. It was back in 2016, I think, that the Conservatives voted against legislation that would have required private sector landlords to ensure that properties are fit for human habitation. The local government minister at the time, Marcus Jones, said the proposal would result in, and I quote, unnecessary regulation and cost to landlords. This is quite an interesting quote. Of course, we believe that all homes should be of a decent standard and all tenants should have a safe place to live regardless of tenure. But local authorities already have strong and effective powers to deal with poor quality and safe accommodation, and we expect them to use them. As we learn of the 2-year-old boy who died as a consequence of mould in the one-bedroom flat where he lived with his parents in Rochdale, Greater Manchester, we reflect upon the fact that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg think there's too much regulation and too many rules in place already. 24 minutes after 10 is the time. Mould. Let's just talk about it. How big a problem is it? What do you know about it? And how correct might I be when I say we're only talking about this because the poor lad died, but actually there are properties in private and public ownership up and down this country that are probably technically unfit for human habitation. We're just lucky, for want of a better word, that responses as profound and as disgusting as little Awab's are very rare. Lewis is in Binfield. Lewis, what do you reckon?
Definitely it's a common thing. I used to live in social housing. When I first got with my partner, we lived in a high-rise block of flats on the 9th floor, and there was definitely a mould issue. In fact, I'd go to say the whole building was probably riddled with it. Yeah. We had a young child. He was 2 years old and developed bronchitis, quite severe, and we ended up in hospital with it. That bronchitis eventually cleared up, but that developed further down the line to him having type 1 diabetes from the stress and the trauma of the bronchitis. We have no history of type 1.
Can you link the bronchitis to the living conditions? Did people agree with you? Did doctors talk to you about it?
Yeah, the doctors agreed that it was definitely, they pretty much said, yes, we think it's down to the fact that there was mould. The mould was excessive. It was a one-bedroom flat. The windows were blown, so there was condensation between the two panels. The mould, 3 people in a one-bedroom flat, 9 stories up. It wasn't the warmest at winter.
No. Who did you complain? Was it private landlord? Was it
social housing?
Social housing. Who did you complain to?
We complained to them. They sent someone round a couple of times. The person that basically was in charge of the whole block of flats gave us a dehumidifier at one stage to see if that helped. But it just kept coming back and spoke to other people in the building. And pretty much every flat in that building has a mould issue.
And that's. I need to walk a tightrope here, Lewis, with your help, because that's kind of half of my point this morning, is that this is not extraordinary or freakish. What's extraordinary and freakish, thank God, is that little Awab died. your kid is your child is okay, albeit that they've developed type 1 diabetes, which is a curse, in many ways. But thank goodness they're still alive. And until something as tragic as this happens, the story doesn't quite get over the parapet of national attention, does it? And yet, I think you're right. I think it's going to be incredibly common, this kind of thing. What could you do? I've got lots of people waiting. I won't keep you for much longer. But what could you do? So dehumidifiers can work. Actually, damp is an exacerbating factor, but they can't fix.
When the windows are blown anyway, and there's
what do you mean the windows are blown?
So condensation between the two panels. It was double glazing, but there was condensation between the two panels. So obviously there was no seal around the windows, so there was a constant draft coming through. So
you've got almost a membrane of moisture around the property.
Yeah. And when you're 9 stories up, it's not the easiest thing to
fix yourself.
Clear, but it was, and I hand on heart believe that condensation, that mould, that bronchitis, that developed into everything, and that's why we are where we are, and that's why we worked hard to get out where we were, and we were lucky.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. I think the key word here is probably immunology or immunity. These things can affect immune systems. That is our experience. And if the immune system is affected, who knows what it might open the door to. I'm sorry to hear this, Lewis. Again, how many times do we say this on the programme? We put a theory out at 10 o'clock, desperately hoping that it's wrong. My switchboard, simply through the busyness of it, suggests that we're not. James is in Enfield. James, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I actually work with the Housing Association. I do work as a subcontractor for them in London.
Oh, yeah.
And I've worked with a few housing associations. And I'll tell you now, the state of the properties I go into with the mould and rotten furnishings in the kitchen, it is really bad, to the point where even last week I went into a property and I was there 20 minutes. I came out, I couldn't breathe properly, and I had the taste of mould in my mouth for 2 days after. The lady living in the property said it's been 3 years and she's been trying to get them to sort it out, and they just won't.
What would sorting it out involve?
For that place, and a lot of places that I go to, it would involve ripping out the whole kitchen, everything.
This is it.
Fixing the mould, and then refitting everything in a nice way. Because when I say it's bad, it's very bad. And I actually called the Housing Association myself the other day to say to them that I wouldn't even put my dog in this property.
And they can't. I mean, Julie makes a point. How do you even run a dehumidifier if your meter has run out or your energy bill is already unaffordable? But this is the tightrope I have to walk, James, and you understand this. To actually fix this problem, whether we're talking about this 1-bedroom flat in Rochdale where this poor boy contracted the condition that killed him, or whether we're talking about the property you were in last week, it's a huge job. It's an immense job. Like you say, I mentioned tanking a cellar. That's thousands of pounds. You're talking about tearing out kitchens. You have to pull up floorboards. You know, the dice is being rolled every time someone moves into a property like this, that they won't be among the proportion of the population that will have a horrible reaction to the spores in their air.
Yeah, but it's like a car. If you don't look after your car, then eventually the problems that it's going to have is going to be so expensive that you might as well throw it away. If these problems were solved in the beginning, before it was built up, then it wouldn't cost so much. And what I believe should happen is there should be a separate companies that go to all these properties every day, go to as many properties and look at the properties and see what it needs to be done. Because everything, they pass the buck. So it's this problem. Oh, that's not our problem. You have to call this department or that department. And it's one thing. Okay, we'll paint the wall, but we're not going to paint the ceiling, or we'll plaster the ceiling, but you have to paint it yourself. And when there's a 93-year-old lady in the house and they've come to do a job, but they've left it half finished, what are they supposed to do?
What was the lady in the flat where you couldn't breathe's health like?
She looked terrible.
Did she?
And these people look like they're dying. I'm not exaggerating. I'm sorry to say it like that on the radio.
And you've got people essentially in power telling them to be grateful for what they've got and to stop moaning. It's Dickensian, right? It's Victorian. This kind of stuff. Oh dear. James, thank you. 10:31 is the time. Lottie Morley has your headlines. It is 10:36 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Rochdale Borough Housing describes itself as the UK's first tenant and employee co-owned mutual housing society. I think since the early 1980s, housing has been through so many twists and turns. It's rather hard to know even what some of the terms mean, what some of the phrases mean. What is social housing as opposed to, for example, mutual housing? And if this is co-owned by tenants and employees, what responsibilities do local government, what responsibilities does Rochdale Council have for the conditions in the flat that led to the death of this little boy? I don't know, but I do know this, and I hate it when this happens. I got, the old joke about how if you want to make the phones ring on a radio phone-in show, just ask if there's anybody old out there feeling poorly. It's a useful way of displaying that it's not hard to make the phones ring on a radio phone-in show. It takes a while to understand that, actually. You could just say, "Oh, immigration, isn't it awful?" and your phones will ring off the hook. Not that anyone would ever do that, of course. But sometimes the opposite is true. So sometimes the phones ring off the hook, and it is both surprising and profoundly significant. And this simple question about mould and how commonplace it is. So we are all understandably heartbroken to read about little Awab Ishak, who died in December of 2020, just 3 months after a midwife had raised concerns with Children's Services over the potential impact of mould in his home on his health. But the actual mould is not extraordinary or remarkable. The Ishak's reaction to it is the extremity, the worst possible reaction, but it's close to normal, I think. Andy's in Nottingham. Andy, what can you tell us?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Yes, I was just talking to your producer about we're going through exactly the same thing with our property at the minute. We're in a housing association house, and my daughter's too, same as the young lad who sadly passed. And we've been on to the housing association for months and months about the mould and the damp in our house, and nothing's been done. We've been down the solicitor route, and just nothing's happening.
What do they say to you? What if you ever get anybody on the phone and you say, "Could you just send someone round?" Have they sent anybody round?
Yeah, they sent people round. Like I said, they had a list from the solicitor what they needed to do. They agreed this list. They've done stuff. They've painted over the mould with like magnesium paint.
Right.
It's meant to stop it from coming back through again, but it's coming straight back through again. My daughter was in the hospital this week. She got out yesterday.
Oh, mate.
She's had bronchitis, and it's caused her asthma to get worse, and now she's on the red inhalers. It's beyond a joke.
Do the doctors think there's a link between the did you ask them even?
Yeah, they said they could be. They couldn't actually pinpoint it, but they said it's got a high chance it could be through that. At the minute, she's sleeping in a mattress in my little boy's bedroom. It's just
because that room's not mould. That's not got as much mould in it, or the little boy's room's not got mould in it.
No, that's right. Yeah.
What are you going to do, Andy?
This is it. I don't know. When I heard you talking about it, and I seen the news article yesterday with the 2-year-old, and I was in the hospital the same day with my daughter.
Oh, man.
She was blue in the lips because she was struggling for breath. We just don't know what to do.
I don't know what to say to you, man. I mean, you appreciate the gravity of this situation and the seriousness of it.
It just scares me to death. I just don't know what to say.
Is there anything you can do? I mean, have you... as in sort of... I suppose if you start doing DIY around the place, you're going to be in breach of your tenancy agreement in some ways as well.
Yeah, this is it. And I'm not one for DIY. I'm not clued up like that. And I can't afford to get builders in to come and do it. It's a house and... council house kind of thing, and it's things like this should be sorted, and it's just not fair.
And do you get? I mean, when they've been round and they've painted it, and they're just essentially just hoping you'll shut up, but because your daughter's poorly, you can't shut up. You're not going to shut up. How high up the ladder have you gone? What sort of people have you spoken to?
I've spoken to a solicitor. It was a no-win, no-fee solicitor.
Okay.
He came out, took photos of the property, said, "Yeah, we've got a case." He won the case against the housing association people,
right.
And they said, "You've got to put all these measures into place to come and sort things."
Yeah.
With a year on, and the mould's back, and we're back to square one again.
Oh, Lord above. Well, look, we'll keep your details, Andy. If anyone else comes up with any ideas or anything that would help you, or what else you could do, then we'll be right in touch with you. But it sounds to me like you've done almost everything you can. And bear in mind, I'm just a geezer on the radio. I'm not qualified. I don't have any medical understanding or anything like that. But I've been through similar. I mean, can she live with her nan or something like that for a while? Or I just worry about her. When you said her lips were blue.
Yeah, this is it. We just don't know what to do.
Have you been on holiday recently? Have you been away at all?
No, we haven't. We can't afford to go away.
I thought you were going to say that. I just meant like staying with. I just would love to know if you notice a difference in her health when she's not in the house for a week. Do you see what I mean? Because if you do, then in many ways it makes your mind up for you, doesn't it?
Yeah, I say deep down, I know it's the mould. It's only
the
in the
house.
kid's bedroom where it's worse. Yeah, it's all across one of the back wall. It's just you can put your hand there sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like a waterfall. You can see the water trickling down the wall.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Damp and mould are different things, but they're intrinsically linked. Like I say, all I can do is pass on to you anything that anybody else suggests that you should be doing.
Yeah.
But I would be fascinated to know. I know you can feel it in your bones, but if she was to sleep somewhere else for a week, and you could see. I mean, can you get? What about getting rehoused? I feel like such an idiot because I'm saying things to you that you've already thought of. All these things that I'm saying. Of course you have. You're a dad.
Yeah.
Well, look, as I say, we'll be in touch if we think of anything, or if anybody else thinks of anything, or if you think it would help for us to shout at the Housing Association. But that idea of just getting away for a while, so it's a fascinating area of study, and there are all sorts of conditions that people think might well be linked to mould, but one of the least contentious, one of the most obvious. That's 2 callers in 40 minutes with 2-year-olds with bronchitis or bronchial conditions. Andy, look after yourself. Oh, it makes me very cross. Carmen is in Portsmouth. Carmen, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. I was just listening to your previous caller, and I can confirm it. Yeah, we had the same sort of problem. We moved into a social housing, one of the big major social housing companies' property in central London, and it got to a point. It was actually in January. We don't live there now. We've moved out for other reasons.
Right.
It was actually in January. We started choking. I couldn't breathe. We kept like coughing, and I kept thinking, "What is this? What is this?" And the first thing that came to mind was, "Oh my God, it must be the boiler. We must be suffering from carbon monoxide." So I called the housing, and they called the gas people. The gas people came, turned the gas off, called an ambulance. They came and checked us, checked our oxygen level, and said we're all right. Keep the windows open. After 2 days, the gas people checked the boiler and said, "No, the boiler's fine. It's not emitting anything. It's working perfectly." And then I thought, okay, what is it? And there was black mould coming up in some parts of the property. And I went downstairs to the neighbour downstairs, and she said she had black mould coming up from midway her property. It was I was on the second floor, she was on the first floor. And then when I went round, because we'd only been there a short time, so my daughter was sleeping in my room, and I went round and inspected the property like strongly. I went round and I saw that there was mould everywhere. Yeah. And then we had this big storage cupboard at the back, which was, everybody uses like a walk-in wardrobe. It was full of black mould. So I called the housing and I said, look, there's black mould everywhere. I don't know what to do. I need someone to come and do it. They sent somebody straight away, which is very rare when you're asking for any repair. When the guy came, excuse me, I said, okay, so what are you going to do? Now, I work in construction. I'm not, so I understand a lot about damp and all that stuff. And he goes, I'm just going to wipe it down with bleach. He goes, and then I'm going to paint it over. I said, what paint are you using? Are you using some special damp paint? I said, because, I'll buy some. And he goes, oh, no, it's just undercoat. Okay. I goes, is that all you do? He goes, yeah, this is all they tell us to do. And he wasn't happy with his position and what he was doing.
No, he's working within the parameters set by the association. And then the mould came back, am I right?
Yeah, the mould came back, and like the previous caller said, like this was in January. I mean, we had loads of ventilation. There were vents everywhere.
There are things you can do to mitigate, but once it's in. I think is the grim lesson here, isn't it? I'm glad you got out. I'm cracking on only because of the time, Carmen. And you got the point across. When you say choking, finally. I mean, you could tell your throat was constricting when you were in the building, when you were in the property?
Well, it got to the point where I thought I was going to pass out. So I've got all dizzy. I've become all really dizzy. And I was like, oh, my God, like, what's going on? And then I started to panic. And the first thing I thought of was, well, what's the invisible thing that you can't see that
carbon
can kill you?
monoxide.
And I
Of
thought,
course you
carbon
did.
monoxide.
No, there's something in the air. I'm breathing something in the, and you were, but it wasn't that. And you know, you might get a couple of days respite with a bleaching and a paint job, but you're not going to fix the problem. I don't know if the correct word is structural or not, but my goodness. Carmen, thank you. I'm glad you got out. That's the only option. But of course, the more properties that we're hearing, I hate this. I hate it. As soon as Carmen hangs up, the phone line's flashing up again with someone with an identical story. This is not right. This is not right. And of course, one way that you can perhaps mitigate some of the things we're talking about is to turn the heating up. Ventilation and heating. But what are we talking about every other day at the moment? The cost of energy. It's just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. The numbers are shocking, truly, truly shocking. House gets colder and damper when you turn your heating off to save money. You warm it up again, the mould will kick in. It's going to get worse, this issue. And it's going to be true in social housing and in private housing. Early message, which I clicked on, but I didn't take the name. The notion of an MOT for properties shouldn't be that outlandish, should it? Just an MOT. If you're a landlord, you've got to have an MOT. And the people who inspect it get paid with the money you pay to get your license in order to let out a property. It's a little thing. I think, Andy, we'll keep in touch. We'll find out who his MP is. You could get in touch with your MP. Some people are suggesting the health and safety executive might be able to help. But I can tell you now that Andy is one of hundreds of people contacting the programme today. A quick visit to Idiot's Corner. Someone called Les has been in touch. He says, is that the only help that mighty O'Brien could give to Andy? What a useless individual you are, but keep up the good work. It gives me a good laugh. There's another Gammony fella who's laughing at sick children, possibly finding it funny that one died. Keep the messages coming in, Les. They remind me why I come to work every day, the existence of people like you. 10:52 is the time. It is odd, isn't it, the human condition? Some people, incredibly well-meaning, offering up some advice, some help for people struggling with similar conditions to the ones which almost certainly did cause Awab Ishak's death at the age of 2, mould in his home. And some people just horrible. Some people trying to suggest the parents bear responsibility or that the problems could have been easily avoided. I do get that. You know my curse. I try too hard to understand toxic people because I think if you can't even understand them a tiny bit, you're never going to be able to help them into the light. It's often self-defense. It's often a way to pretend. I first discovered this when Madeleine McCann went missing and the studio was bombarded by people attacking her parents. And you sort of thought, what's that about? And then you realise people are desperate to believe that it couldn't happen to them. It's as if the fickle finger of fate doesn't exist, and any bad things only happen to people who somehow brought it on themselves. And that's an explanation, it's not an excuse. How you can hear about the story, like our friend Les a moment ago in that text of a dead 2-year-old, and send a message to a radio station saying you love it, you're really enjoying it, it's making you laugh, is beyond me, genuinely beyond me. But for people a little lower down the dial of disgusting, there is going to be an element of self-defense involved in this. So if you think you're almost trying to persuade yourself that this could never happen to you. I can tell you now, I've been doing this job for a very long time, and the numbers of people getting in touch with the programme are terrifying. But as an example of the well-meaning responses, here's one of the best, and it covers an awful lot of bases. There are products on the market that are anti-mould. Zinsa make a paint. Anything that's got a mould-resistant formulation is going to be helpful. But this is the text that I think combines all of the well-meaning advice coming into the studio today. James, I work in construction. I've been to hundreds of mould-infested properties. Dehumidifiers, open windows, heating on, clean up any water immediately, don't dry clothes inside. I found Ronseal's 3-in-1 mould killer to be the best thing I've personally used. Ultimately, though, you need to find the cause and fix that before you can get rid of mould, or it will keep returning no matter what you do. So all of these elements of advice are valid and helpful, but none of them are a fix. None of them are a cure. They are mitigations. And, of course, things like dehumidifiers, heating on, open windows, all of these things are rendered prohibitively expensive at the best of times, but particularly in the current crisis. And again, I've read about people who've blocked up ventilation bricks because you can feel the draft coming in, houses that were perhaps built when we all had open fires. you block up some of the ventilation bricks because you can feel the cold draft coming in, but that, of course, means moisture can't get out. There are so many areas where you could make things less bad, but there are none short of tearing out fixtures and fittings, getting under floorboards, getting into attics, getting behind walls. That's the horror of this story, and that's why, for all Michael Gove's strong words, I suspect it's profoundly unhelpful for him to treat this as some sort of freakish or quasi-unique incident, when in fact all that is freakish about this is the consequences of a condition that is commonplace. Oh boy. Matt's in Haringey. Matt, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. So I have got, just listening to the previous callers that have called in, and obviously off the back of that terrible story from yesterday,
yes,
it really hit home with me. Just a very quick bit of background. I've worked for about 15 years in the corporate sector and got sick of it and wanted to do something that would have a bit more of an impact without trying to sound too virtuous. Just wanted to do something a bit more meaningful.
Yes.
So I was looking at getting into charities and that kind of thing, but ultimately landed a gig with a housing association. I won't say who it is, but it felt like a really good fit for me. Somewhere where I could use my experience and have an impact and hopefully, again, not trying to sound too virtuous, but improve people's lives. You know, that was kind of what I wanted to do. But within my role, I also oversaw the customer service team and the complaints process. And week in, week out, we would see so many customers contacting us about mould issues within the properties. And it was just soul destroying. You know, there wasn't the resources in terms of manpower to get maintenance crews out there to fix these issues. Some of the suggestions that your callers have sent in are great, but, you know, if you've got an old dear in a house somewhere, she's not going to be able to start ripping walls out. And
also, you know, things like anti-mould paint are extremely expensive as well. I mean, I did keep stressing that these are, if you like, you know, things that might help, things that do help, but then A, they're not easy to do, and B, they're not solutions to the problem. They're mitigations, alleviations.
Exactly that. And, you know, it got to the point where I would say 40% of my work was dealing with these customers, and I couldn't fix these problems for them. I could empathise with them. I'd try and find them alternative accommodation in, you know, the form of a hotel somewhere if it got really bad. But, you know, coming from the corporate sector where, you know, you're driven by targets, KPIs, etc., there just wasn't that same sense of urgency. And I'm not saying that this is indicative of housing associations everywhere, but in my experience, people had been in the job quite cushy, you know, 25 years, and there just wasn't that urgency to get things done. And then, as I say, there was kind of resource problems as well.
Well, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? Because when they started, they might have been like you.
Quite possibly,
but they get ground down by the things that ground you down, which is your inability to actually make the meaningful difference that you went into the job in the hope of making. So there'll be some coasters, of course there will. There'll be some people swinging the lead like there are in any job, but it's you know, it's hard to see how you sustain that level of commitment and ambition when you can't actually help the people that you want to help, Matt.
Yeah, and there was nothing I could say to them either, because they were right. Every time they'd contact me, ultimately, you know, go through kind of a robust complaints process. Obviously, there's the ombudsman and white papers and, you know, processes that need to be followed. But when it got to me, there's nothing I could do, you know, and I'd have these arguments.
That's soul-destroying for you. I know you're not after sympathy, but that is soul-destroying for you.
I quit at the end of the day. I
bet
couldn't
you
deal
did.
with it.
Yeah.
I'm back at the corporate sector now, and it was a defeat for me, really. It was you know, again, wanting to go in and just do something a bit more impactful, and it was soul destroying. I couldn't
but
do it.
You can't do it. You've got people describing uninhabitable conditions to you, and you can't help them at all.
This is it, and I think you know this story has just really scratched the surface of
that's my
what
fear.
I think.
It's not my fear anymore. It's not my fear anymore. It's not your fear anymore, is it? It's knowledge. It's certain.
Well, what I will say is that housing associations have also got that fear. Although at least the one I worked for did. They know that this is a problem.
Yeah. There
was an ITV story a few years back where they really went after a housing association. Again, I won't say who it is, but you know, the industry knows that there's a problem, but there's a lack of funding, there's a lack of resource, and I also think at the very top of the tree, there's just a lack of desire. There's the
Well, I'd add one thing to that, and that is a political ideology in place at the moment that thinks there's too much regulation and too much health and safety and too much protection and too much requirements on owners and landlords to look after either their workers or the properties that they rent out. And I think until we show that ideology the door, the idea of getting a handle on any of this, however passionate Michael Gove may get in his condemnation of this one executive of one housing association, it's never going to happen, Matt.
No. Well,
Mate,
this is it.
thank you for your call. It was a really useful counterpoint of what it's actually like to be trying to help and having your hands and your feet and your ankles tied together. Last word on this to Dave, who's in Leeds. He says, I'm actually the mate of Danny, the guy who sent you the wood plate. This is a lovely little piece of polished wood that Danny sent me from, I think, the old Burton store in Leeds, and he's put a little brass thing on it. So whenever I say touch wood, I actually have a bit of wood in the studio that I can touch. So give my best to Danny, Dave. He says, I'm a landlord. I have 2 properties. I keep the houses in top condition, electric and gas appliances checked every year. I also pay a letting agent 12% of my rent income. They go to the property and I get a report so the houses get checked and I can keep up with any issues. This is not hard, James, and landlords should be made to do it. That involves laws, that involves regulations, that involves what Jacob Rees-Mogg likes to call red tape, and we all know how they feel about that. It's 11:01. It's 11:05. I'm in a bit of a tricky situation. Nothing like that. Don't worry, matron. I can't read the Deputy Prime Minister's tweet in which he reveals that there are 2 formal complaints about him allegedly bullying, and calling upon the Prime Minister to launch an investigation. I can't read it because I'm currently blocked by the Deputy Prime Minister on Twitter. I'm going to have to read it. I'm going to have to get it on paper. Can I have it on paper, please? I can't. Do you know why I'm blocked by the Deputy Prime Minister on Twitter? Shall I tell you why I'm blocked by the Deputy Prime Minister on Twitter? He lied about me on Ian Dale's show, unchallenged. He was allowed to. He told complete lies about me. So I assembled some clips of him talking, actual video clips of him with his actual face and his funny little mouth moving. And we put them all together. I didn't do it, actually. My colleague Adrian did it. We put them all together, and it was absolutely damning. It was an unbelievable catalogue of disgusting conduct. But it was all clips of him actually speaking. So, you see, he accused me of lying, and I put together a little film of him speaking. And it upset him so much, he actually blocked me. So I'm in the strange position of trying to cover politics and a big political story involving a recent tweet sent out by the Deputy Prime Minister while blocked on Twitter by the Deputy Prime... Oh, here it is. Listen to this. Do you know what this is? Younger listeners may not recognise this noise. That's paper, that is. I've got it on paper. I've got the letter on paper. Dear Prime Minister, when you entered number 10 Downing Street on the 25th of October, you rightly stated that this government will have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. Minutes later, you put Suella Braverman and Gavin Williamson in the cabinet. Were you having a laugh? Sorry, I made up the second bit of that sentence. He goes on, I am proud to take this as a personal article of faith. Gavin Williamson! That's why I'm cross with Dominic Raab today. I'd forgotten about Gavin Williamson for 10 minutes. I was desperately racking my brains yesterday to remember who'd got into trouble for bullying recently. I thought it was Suella Braverman. It's not Suella Braverman. She's in trouble for leaking stuff and sending documents to backbenchers' wives that she's not supposed to be sharing with anybody. She's in trouble with security issue. I couldn't remember who the bully was. I had somehow managed to mentally tell Gavin Williamson to go away and shut up. I'd actually managed to remove him from my consciousness. But he's the fella. I think he resigned more or less for being in exactly the same situation that Dominic Raab finds himself in now. Didn't he? So hard to keep up. How long's Rishi Sunak been Prime Minister? Yeah. Anyway, I have just been notified that 2 separate complaints have formally been made against me in parallel from my time as Foreign Secretary and my first tenure as Justice Secretary, which ended in September of this year. Now, here's the interesting bit. I am therefore writing to request that you commission an independent investigation into the claims as soon as possible. I will cooperate fully and respect whatever outcome you decide. I remain committed to serving this government with integrity and professionalism as Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor. Good Lord, how many jobs has he got? And welcome the opportunity to address any complaints transparently. So I'm just thinking out loud now. Who's going to do the investigation? Who's going to mark his homework? It can't be the Parliamentary Commission. I should probably check this with Theo Usherwood. I don't think it can be the Parliamentary Commissioner, can it? Because the alleged bullying, it didn't happen in Parliament, did it? So the Parliamentary Commissioner can't do it. I suppose the Prime Minister could ask his independent advisor on ethics to launch the investigation. altogether now, but he hasn't got one, has he? He hasn't actually appointed one. I think 2. Boris Johnson lost 2, didn't he? Boris Johnson lost 2 independent ethics advisors. They both resigned in disgust at the ethics on display in his government. Liz Truss didn't appoint one at all, which was probably wise in retrospect. Arguably the only wise thing she did as Prime Minister. Why on earth would you appoint an ethics advisor when you haven't got any ethics? What advice are you going to get from an ethics advisor? And Rishi Sunak hasn't appointed an ethics advisor yet. So he's called for, what's he called for? An independent investigation. Who's going to... I'll do it. I'll get him on the phone. I'll do it. Seriously. Who's going to do an independent investigation into Dominic Raab? The Parliamentary Commissioner can't do it because these allegations don't involve behaviour that occurred in Parliament. And the Prime Minister's independent ethics advisor can't do it because after Boris Johnson set fire to anything that remotely resembles a framework of ethical checks and balances in government, there's no independent ethics advisor. We better find out from Theo. 9 minutes after 11 is the time. It's to American politics. It could be Sue Gray again, says John. Is she still around? Sue Gray could do it, could she? I don't even know. But anyway, Dominic Raab wants an independent investigation into 2 separate complaints of bullying that have been made against him in his 2 previous roles in government as Foreign Secretary and Justice Secretary. We should keep an eye on this. We will keep an eye on this because Simon MacDonald, of course, told Andrew Marr on Monday that he did recognise the characterisation of Dominic Raab as a bully. Rishi Sunak insisted that he didn't recognise the characterisation of Dominic Raab as a bully, which essentially translates as simply saying, well, he's never bullied me. But bullies generally don't bully people above them in the food chain, do they? They bully people below them, and the further below they are, the more bullying they're likely to receive. That was around the time that Jeremy Hunt said that he didn't accept the premise that Brexit had caused damage to the British economy. That's who you've got in charge now. A bloke who doesn't recognise the characterisation of a bully, despite people queuing up to accuse him of bullying, and a bloke who doesn't accept the premise of his own government's financial forecasts. So I think you can understand why we're going to talk about American politics instead. And we're going to talk about Donald Trump. And we're going to begin with a little reminder that not that long ago, Donald Trump tried to withhold $400 million worth of Congress-backed aid to Ukraine until Volodymyr Zelensky, whose name was not household at that point because Putin hadn't invaded his country, unless Volodymyr Zelensky agreed to collaborate, co-conspire on one of the ludicrous conspiracy theories that Donald Trump and his friends on the far right of American media and politics were inflating in the hope of affecting the result of the last American election. Just remember that. It's the idea that you know, that if Trump had been in the White... I can't believe I'm saying these words out loud, but I heard it being discussed earlier. The idea that if Trump had been in the White House, Vladimir Putin might not have invaded Ukraine. Trump probably would have joined in. $400 million of Congress-backed aid to Ukraine that Trump tried to withhold until Zelensky got his hands dirty on Donald Trump's behalf. That's the kind of crook, that's the kind of gangster that you're talking about here. But he's back in the game. Do you want to hear it? I don't think any major Republicans turned up, did they, at Mar-a-Lago yesterday? I think that this speech was delivered mostly to members of his own country club, which it's an interesting departure from traditional politics, at least. Here he is, and apologies in advance if this brings you out in hives.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States. Our country is in a horrible state. We're in grave trouble. This is not a task for a politician or a conventional candidate. This is a task for a great movement that embodies the courage, confidence, and the spirit of the American people. This is a movement. This is not for any one individual. This is a job for tens of millions of proud people working together from all across the land and from all walks of life, young and old, black and white, Hispanic and Asian, many of whom we have brought together for the very, very first time.
So are they all going to take it in turns then to be president? It's the same old problem with Donald Trump. 52% of you wants to laugh your head off at how ridiculous he is, and 48% of you is deeply aware of how sinister and dangerous he is. So we're going to do the coma question that we bring out at times of particular political confusion, and we're going to ask this. How can this be happening? Knowing what we now know, about the man? How can this be happening? Explain to somebody who's been in a coma for be sort of 7 or 8 years, wouldn't it? Let's say 10 years, a nice round number. Somebody who fell into a coma when Barack Obama was in the White House is waking up to find that a man who launched an attempted coup on the seat of American government while denying that he'd lost an election that he'd lost and sent a bunch of crazies baying for the blood of his own vice president. Mike Pence has sort of spoken about how frightened he was. So a man whose lies launched a coup, an attempted coup, undertaken by crazies who were baying for the blood of his own vice president, is now having another go at becoming president while still lying about the fact that he lost the last election. So you need to explain to somebody who fell into a deep, deep sleep when Barack Obama was in the White House, coming towards the end of his time in the White House. Oh no, does that work? Does the coma have to have started after the Capitol coup? What do you think? No, it's going to have to have started from when he lost the last election and lied about it. He can't go back to Obama, can it? Because then you've missed out all the stuff that's happened since. Oh boy, can you wake up for a bit halfway through the coma and see the attempted coup and then fall back to sleep again? Would that work? No. All right. So the coup begins. The coma begins as Trump loyalists marched towards the Capitol baying for the blood of the Vice President Mike Pence. That's when you fell asleep, okay? And you watched that as I did. I remember that night, actually. I don't know that I've ever been quite so chilled by Western politics as I was that night. I got quite cross, actually, with people who'd been kind of cheerleading for Trump and offering up apologies for him. And so naively, I thought that night, that's it then. There it is. They're going to be queuing up to say sorry. God, that was so naive, wasn't it? I thought the sight of people baying for the blood of the vice president, storming the Capitol in Washington, D.C., at the behest of a man who wasn't even pretending not to be a fascist anymore. I honestly thought that night, January the 6th, I honestly thought, that's it now. Fire, thank goodness for that. Now that they'll all stop because no one can watch this and still stay on side with this monstrous individual. Nobody can watch this and not feel deep, deep shame that they didn't call him out for the disgusting fascist that he is from the very, very beginning. Naive little me, of course, forgot that the reason why fascist leaders do well is because there's lots of little fascists who love having a fascist leader. But that's my explanation for part of it. So here's the question. You were watching telly that night. You saw Donald Trump essentially spawning a violent coup attempt in the seat of American government while telling barefaced and blatant lies about the last American election, right? And you thought to yourself, well, that's it. That's got to be game over for him. And you just woke up today and heard not only is he still at large, he's still free, but he's also now not only contemplating another tilt at the presidency, another tilt at the White House, but this is crucial. He can rely upon the votes of something like 60 to 70% of the Republican Party. So my question for you is, how can that be happening? How can a liar so blatant and egregious, a man so obviously and completely corrupt, in the context of the land of the free, the America of George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, how can he be even able to contemplate another tilt at the presidency, never mind confident of the support of 60 to 70% of traditional Republican voters? What has happened in the space of that 2.5 years? It is almost unbelievable. Well, it is actually unbelievable if you're paying attention. But of course, if you've been in a coma and you've just woken up, how does this make sense? Explain to my recently aroused friend, my recently woken friend. Explain to me if you like. I'll pretend that I've been asleep. I fell asleep watching an attempted coup on American soil unfolding at the behest of a defeated president who was still lying about his loss. And I've just woken up to find that he's going to have another go in a couple of years at getting back into the White House. Explain that to me, ideally in words of one syllable. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:18. American callers obviously particularly welcome. There's one particularly stupid text that came in. It said something like they weren't baying for Mike Pence's blood, they were baying for Nancy Pelosi's, you muppet. So, I mean, not only factually incorrect, of course, but I mean, they were also baying for Nancy Pelosi's blood. But the idea that, oh, that's okay then, it was a Democrat politician, that's like the essence of footballification, isn't it? You're supposed to be opposed to baying mobs calling for the blood of elected politicians having been launched by a politician lying about the last election result. You're not supposed to say, no, actually, I think you'll find the blood they were baying for was a politician from a party that I don't like. Don't ask me why, I just know that I don't like. I mean, that's incredible. But also the first part of the answer to the question of how can this possibly be happening? People have believed the lies is the starter for 10. How many people in America still believe that Donald Trump lost the election? And if he won the election, and if he won it, but was denied it, why is he running again? How can he possibly trust the system? It's so mad. It's so crazy that I don't think anyone's going to be able to fully explain it. But if enough people try, we might be able to assemble a sort of tapestry theory of how this can even be happening. 23 minutes after 11. And remember, the bit that fascinates me most is not so much that he's doing it, that the hat is in the ring, but that he's doing it with some confidence that a decent percentage of Republican voters, of the base, will still be on board. Alex in Cardiff. Alec, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. How's it going?
Pretty good.
Good stuff. Yeah. So, I mean, right from the start of his presidency, I think he used using the word like fake news and what have you. And there was an interview that he did once whereby he said he proclaimed to have invented the word fake.
Did he?
I remember really getting my attention that he's claiming he's invented that word. And he's just, right from the start, I mean, there's a hard right saying, which is question everything. And there's just no respect for the media, for education settings, for the police force and what have you, and he's just ingrained that in society. You just question everything, and
that means you don't believe anything. It doesn't quite account for why you do believe the things that aren't true. I know it's part of the answer.
You question everything, with the exception of Donald Trump, it would appear, because he's created a cult, and these people, they're absolutely obsessed. It's just insane. There's a few people I follow on Twitter and just look at what they're saying. And with Nancy Pelosi and her husband the other week, what happened with him?
Yes.
And I remember thinking before I went onto Twitter, thinking, I wonder what the hard right is saying. How are they going to twist this?
This is when one of their own essentially turned up at the Pelosi's home, hoping to kill Nancy Pelosi, and she wasn't in, so he attacked her husband.
Yeah, yes. And so I questioned the same. I said, what are they going to say? How are they going to twist this? And I went onto Twitter, and then I'm sure you know what people are proclaiming happened, and it's just nuts. And saying
Elon Musk retweeted one particularly outlandish conspiracy theory, and then even he had the grace to delete it. Okay, Alex, so this answer works up to the point of the coup. I thought, and I am going to use myself as a lens through which to examine this story, because I can, and I think it might be helpful. I watched events that night on January the 6th.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's it. It's over now. Everyone can see what he is. All of the little fits of the vapors that people like me had about using the F word and, it's a bit strong. Do we reach for that? Yeah. You saw there, bold base fascism. Essentially launching an armed mob upon the seat of American government while lying about election results. It doesn't get any more gross than that. And for all the Bannon playbook, for all the flooding the zone, for all the boasting about being a sex offender and having it excused as locker room talk by people like Nigel Farage, all of the grossness, all of the disgusting stuff could have possibly been filed under ugly politics. But when you see an attempted coup underway at the behest of a deposed president who's still lying about losing, that to me was different. So the question isn't how did Trump achieve the presidency or how did he achieve popularity? Because the short answer to that, as you've just provided, is populism and demagoguery. How did he hang on to it after January the 6th? How could people not have scales fall from their eyes after that night?
Because the hard right and the people conspiracies like QAnon, they say that the FBI set it up. It was all a stooge. It was all fake news. And they compared it to the Black Lives Matter protest as well, and saying that the BLM, they were burning cities and destroying shops and businesses, yet they were left alone. the people, they just believe they're all. It's
Did
so
you say
entrenched
we're going to
and
be?
so-
We're dancing around the same maypole, which is you people like you and me and most people listening to this program are always going to be utterly baffled by how people can believe things that are utterly and demonstrably
it's a
untrue.
cult.
Untrue.
He's created a cult. It's an absolute cult. You mean, I'm sure you watch some of his speeches. Some of the stuff he says, it's just illogical. It doesn't make any sense. He doesn't have joined up sentences, yet people still just lap it all up because he's something different, because he's not your traditional politician. And he's taken advantage of that right from the start, from the very beginning. He knew how to play the media.
Because the only way he was ever going to get elected was by completely subverting objective reality and denigrating the truth. And once that genie is out of the bottle, not that he'd want to get it back in again, but the society can't get it back in again.
And he's created so much divisiveness in America, and it's just crazy. And he just peddles lie after lie, as you know, as everyone knows, and people just lap it up. And you know, people on the hard right. And he said himself,
I don't think we can keep talking about the hard right, because that makes it sound like a minority.
Yeah, well, yeah. Okay,
we're talking about tens of millions of people.
Well, lots of people in the Republican Party. I mean, it is after the midterms last week. I mean, it was really interesting results that came out there with DeSantis. He might not even win the Republican nomination.
Well, in many ways, for civilization, the best case scenario would be that he sort of ends up splitting the vote on the right of American politics. But we shall have to wait and see what transpires. Again, to just reiterate why I'm asking this question and some elements of Alex's answer. The reason why his supporters attacked the Capitol building in Washington was in the hope of keeping him in power by preventing Congress from formalising Joe Biden's election victory. That is about as fascistic as it gets. That they were literally trying to prevent Congress from counting the votes to formalise the victory of President-elect Joe Biden. And that's what they were doing, and they were doing it with his approval. It was a coup attempt. It was a fascist, or fascistic, if you must, attempt to subvert democracy. And he's having another go, and people are cheering him. It's incredible, right? And this is where I think a little bit of Western exceptionalism creeps in. A little bit of arrogance, a little bit of post-colonial privilege, because you sort of find yourself thinking, it's not supposed to happen in countries like this. Not supposed to happen in Western English-speaking countries. Of course it is. Of course it can. It very nearly did. But the idea that you get another go and people are up for it, absolutely incredible. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Lottie Morley is here now with your headline. It's 11:34. It's one of those corners of history that is perhaps not as well understood or as well known as it should be. But Adolf Hitler got sent to prison in 1924, I think, for about 5 years for treason. He didn't serve 5 years. He was in with Rudolf Hess and another fella who I can't remember. But you know, imagine if we were doing a radio phone-in in Germany in the early 1930s, and we'd be saying, how can this fella still be a political player? He was in prison for treason 5 years ago. And I'm not. I'm in the United Kingdom talking about the United States in 2022. And so I'm saying, how can this fella still be a player politically? How can he be running for president again when he launched a coup against his own country in, January of 2021, 18 months ago, give or take? It is objectively breathtaking. Simon's in Sleaford. Simon, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, I've been going backwards and forwards to America since I was about 17. I have quite a large family over there. Half of them are sort of Democrats, half Republican.
Traditional Republican, or I nearly used the word for bat poo there, which I can't say on the radio. Yes.
Well, I hope you'll probably be able to sort of make make that.
I'll work it out.
Go on. So I was 17, 1979, so that ages me a bit. I think Carter was in the White House. It may be Carter, maybe Reagan.
Yeah.
And I was in a stop sign with my aunt, and there was some Latino guys selling oranges.
Yeah.
And I said to my aunt, well, these are all immigrants. Why aren't they sending them back? In my naivety, 17-year-old night. But no, they're trying to make a living.
Right.
And if they come to this country, they're trying to make a living selling oranges. Fast forward 40 years, and now it's we want to build a wall.
Oh, okay.
Stop all
so
these
they've been on a journey, so to speak.
Yeah. And I was over there a few years ago staying with my uncle, again a Republican, and his favourite TV channel is One American News.
Right, which is for people who find Fox News too sensible.
Oh, I mean, I think when when the Nazis left, they set up a news station, and OAN is one of them. But I think part of it is how insular American is, how they get their news as well. Right. Trevor Noah, the late night,
the Daily Show,
doing your research, I think it was him. He said, Italy has just elected its first woman president, prime minister. And the whole audience started to applaud until he said, well, actually, she was a supporter of Mussolini and the fascists.
Yeah, same party.
So maybe, I think we have a section of America.
Yeah, but they watched, wherever they get their news, they watched the coup attempt. They watched January the 6th. They know that Donald Trump unleashed armed people or sort of semi-armed people to seek to overthrow the result of a democratic election and give him power as an unelected leader. I mean, that is the fascist playbook, I'm afraid. People might be uncomfortable with the word, but tough. It doesn't get more fascistic than that. And they saw that wherever they get their news. They saw that happen. They know that happened. They know that 5 people died during or following the event. They know that some of the people who took part in it are being sent to jail. And yet the man who launched it is trying to get back into the White House. I mean, it's incredible, right?
But they have over there, certainly with Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, these reach a big proportion of population, and people pay for these channels.
And do they still subscribe to the lie about the last election? Do they? Because I'm not. And maybe this is a failure on my part. I'm not going to change because life's too short, and I don't really want it in my life. But do they broadcast? Do they still support the lie? Do people like Tucker Carlson on Fox News still say that Donald Trump won the last election? Do you know? You may not know the answer to that question.
I think no matter what, they'll still skew it toward their own agenda.
It's just this thing, isn't it? And this must be throughout history how all the really bad stuff happens. Is that we sit here thinking, there's got to be a point beyond which they won't go. There's got to be a point at which they'll disown him, but there isn't, is there?
Your analogy about Hitler being sentenced and go,
for treason.
He knew the judge, but he knew the judge.
Right.
The judge knew him. I can't remember the exact.
He still got sent to jail.
But he didn't serve as long as the sentence.
No, he didn't. He did 9 months of a 5-year sentence, and 10 years or so. He's back in the game. Okay. So I mean, we think that it's all, and you may have just accidentally added to this perception. We think it's all sort of weirdos watching telly in their bunkers, but actually, his appeal extends all the way to the wife of a Supreme Court judge, most obviously, actually, who was caught up in all of the January the 6th stuff. So that's part of the answer. Actually, is that it's not just crackpots coming from the boondocks. He has support in the establishment itself, in the heart of power. And you can't really overthrow a democratically elected government unless people in government or people close to government or people attached to government are helping or are up for it. You also usually need the military. You need some generals. And it is the worst form of exceptionalism on my part to sort of just feel in my bones as a younger man that this could never happen in America or the UK. What would Boris Johnson loyalists have done, given the opportunity? Some of them speaking absolutely terrifying gibberish in the context, and not just Nadine Dorries, who of course does that all the time, in the context of Boris Johnson being removed from office for repeated and egregious corruption. People prepared not just to excuse it, but to claim that he's some sort of messiah. Bo's in Philadelphia. Bo, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hey, James. I'm a broadcast journalist here in Pennsylvania. I've been listening to you for a while, and you've really helped me deal with people with this type of mindset in a balanced manner. So I thank you for that. My station is extraordinarily balanced. Okay. We can't go one way or another, so I'm going to preface it by that. But, James, I really think a lot of people that I've interviewed, and I've interviewed a lot of Trump supporters in 2020, in 2016, and especially when you get outside of major urban areas that really tend to vote for the Democratic candidate. Yeah. They like to just be told something, and I really feel like Donald Trump is telling them what they want to hear, and it doesn't really matter if there's any substance to back that up. He's just telling them what they want to hear. It's feel-good politics, and again, the question of why people still support him after January 6th, after what he did or didn't do, I think that's the million-dollar question that every journalist in America is trying to answer, James. And it's interesting that listening to your show, it seems like your print media seems to really favor the one side over another. With American television outside of Fox News, which is really widely watched, it's a lot more balanced. But people don't want to believe that because I think a lot of people just felt like the government didn't care about them. Politicians have just kind of said whatever they've had to say. But Donald Trump says whatever he needs to say to connect to that person at that moment. And a lot of people have bought into it. And it's really difficult to report on it. It's really difficult to try to, let people know that, hey, this isn't actually true.
This fascinates me,
really
Bo, because you describe the idea. We get this a little bit here with the BBC, because Fox News in America is so skewed. They think, a lot of consumers think that balance must be biased, that balance must be somehow the counterbalance to Fox News, whereas in fact most broadcasters, and I'm sure you and your platform pursue a genuinely balanced position, but it looks biased in comparison to Fox because Fox has gone so far in one direction.
Well, just to give you an example, James, for the midterm elections, Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman for the Senate seat here in Pennsylvania, I did a series of stories where they would run television ads that were just complete crackers, as you would say, in England. And so I just did, hey, this is the actual truth. This is what Mehmet Oz is saying about John Fetterman. I just did this is you wouldn't believe the emails I got of people just saying I'm biased, I'm stupid, I'm, super left, wing. It's just really interesting. And all I did was just say, look, this is the actual fact. But people don't want to be told that. And when you've thrown in your entire ethos into one person, you don't want to be told that you are completely wrong because it just completely shatters your self-identity. And the good news, James, is after these midterm elections, and if you look, Donald Trump as a politician is a loser. Outside of 2016, he lost all these state races in 2017, the 2018 midterms, 2020, 2022. I don't think he has a chance to win.
Not the primaries. Could he not win the primary as opposed to the presidency? That's where the support of the base is crucial. It's not the same as a midterm, is it? All he has to do is win over Republicans.
He could, but James, it is interesting. Right after this midterms, people are abandoning ship. Even Fox News is saying we need to move on from this guy, Ron DeSantis, who you have played with that woke speech you did a few weeks ago.
That's right,
He seems to be the new darling, but we'll have to see how it plays out. I think Donald Trump running, if he were to win the Republican primary, that would be the best news for Joe Biden and Democrats.
Gosh.
And James, just before you go, I really appreciate talking to you. You have really taught me a lot.
That's an incredible thing to hear, Bo. You've made me feel uncharacteristically humble.
Well, you shouldn't, because I love that about you. I love that false humility, I'll call it. But hey, real quick, I do a Saturday morning show that runs from 7 to 9
I was about to say get the plug in, but here you are taking it anyway.
No. I want you on the show, James. We can do Zoom. I actually did Zoom with the head of the St. Patrick's Cathedral in Ireland. We can get you on. I will plug your book. I think you got great stuff to say. I'd love to have you on the show for a 5-minute Zoom interview. It would really... It would be great.
Sounds like a plan. Stay on the line, and we'll do that. We'll make that happen. I'm a bit busy this weekend actually, but we'll make it happen. Terms and conditions notwithstanding, 11:45 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. That's the thing, you see. I wanted to ask Bo, and I might ask him this on his own show, about what balance means when you're talking about January the 6th. Do you say it's an attempted coup, but on the other hand, it isn't? They were baying for the blood of Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi, but on the other hand, they weren't. How do you report that in a balanced fashion? It was a fascist coup attempt. No, it wasn't. It was a legitimate, what did they start calling it not long ago? Legitimate concerns. Do you remember that? When we started allowing racists onto air because they had legitimate concerns. Nothing legitimate about them at all, but that's, of course, what false equivalence does. 11:46 is the time. PMQs on the way at 12. Dominic Raab, within hours, 2 hours, is it, or less, of revealing that he's now under, or he wants to be investigated because there are 2 formal allegations against him from 2 separate jobs that he had. Personally, I'd be surprised if this was the end of it. I think once this seal breaks, there might be more people coming forward. I don't know. I could be wrong. We shall see. So he's now going to stand up in the House of Commons to take questions from Angela Rayner, who will be deputising for Keir Starmer because Rishi Sunak is in Bali having his meeting with the Chinese Premier cancelled. Oh, what a time to be alive. It's 10 to 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As if by magic, National Public Radio, NPR in America, which is a huge organisation, they've put a headline on Trump having another swing at the presidency, which is precisely how it should be reported, how it has to be reported. They simply write, breaking, Donald Trump, who tried to overthrow the results of the 2020 presidential election and inspired a deadly riot at the Capitol in a desperate attempt to keep himself in power, has filed to run for president again in 2024. That's not an opinion. That's just counting. And yet I don't think even journalists who perhaps do know better or should know better, I don't think they realise the damage that they do when they talk about him as if he's in any way normal, as if he's in any way part of the political process, as if you can have a conversation about whether or not Donald Trump this or Donald Trump that. There is the story. He tried to overthrow the results of the 2020 election and inspired a deadly riot, as in people are dead as a result of it, at the Capitol in a desperate attempt to keep himself in power. That's how you describe it. You don't have conversations about policy decisions or whether things might have been different. Well, you should mention Ukraine when you're talking about Donald Trump. You should mention, of course, that he threatened to withhold $400 million of Congress-backed aid if Volodymyr Zelensky didn't agree to join in one of his corrupt plans to tell lies about Joe Biden. So there is that's vaguely relevant, but the rest of it, that's all you do. All you talk about is the fact that he's a crook, he's a gangster, he's a fascist. But the British media is, in many ways, culpable, just in the context, in the style of the conversations, because we weren't equipped. We didn't have the vocabulary to talk about somebody like this. Hitler went to jail in 1924 for treason. 10 years later, he's running for office. Unless you actually call a spade, then that happens. That stuff happens. 11:52 is the time. Shall we summon the Usherwood? There's quite a lot to do. We've got PMQs on the way, and we should probably find out a little bit more about Dominic Raab. Then we have a quick word with Dorothy, and hopefully by the time Dorothy and I have finished our business together, Theo will be in the studio. Summon the Usherwood, please. I just did that shortly. I only just saw John's message afterwards. He says, James, you're great, but can you summon the Usherwood, please? I need more, John. Well, why? What is it you think he can do that I can't do? I'm jealous now. I'm jealous of your attention and affection. 11:53 is the time. Dorothy's in Westwood Ho! Dorothy, I think we've addressed this question together before, haven't we? Or something similar.
Something similar, I believe. Good morning.
Good morning. Carry on.
Carry on. Well, I'm born and raised in the States. All my family and all my oldest friends live back in the States. And I have a family member, my brother, who was ex-military, and friends I've known most of my life who still would vote for him and still support him. And they consider it, this is their point, they consider it their righteous, patriotic duty to get him in office, they still believe, to drain the swamp, to get rid of the establishment, and somehow everything will be better.
How do they process or excuse the coup attempt on January the 6th, the deadly coup attempt that he inspired?
They keep moving the goalposts, because initially I was really shocked when this happened. And some of the responses when I said, how could this happen? They're all traitors. What's wrong with them? The first excuse was, it's not really Trump supporters. It was Antifa wearing MAGA gear.
God, did you see, the thing is, I don't know about you, but I saw some of that and I just thought, well, that's only going to play to absolute pond life, but it doesn't, does it? It plays to beyond the pond, as it were.
Well, but then it's moved from that now to one of my oldest friends. Well, friends now. I don't know we have much in common anymore. But he's gone from that to the fact that the only real victim of January 6th was Ashley Babbitt,
who was one of the rioters, one of the
killed.
Yeah.
Yes. He's moved from that to that.
I see. So, I mean, normally in the context of law and order, these people would think that if you're in the process of committing a crime and you get hurt or killed, it's entirely your fault, and the responsibility lies entirely with you. If, for example, an unarmed young black man gets shot in a car park, it's his fault. But someone launching a coup attempt ends up dead, and it's all the fault of anyone except the person involved in the coup attempt.
Well, she died in the line of her patriotic duty.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I'm trying to think of it, is that no fact tastes better to them than that steady drip of Kool-Aid that they've been drinking. Of the anti-establishment.
And you just can never wean them off it. And that is the point. I'm glad you rang in, because that's the bit I was missing. Not the final piece of the jigsaw, but a big piece of the jigsaw is, of course, the fact that they move the goalpost. So they go from saying that, and they do it effortlessly, and they do it seamlessly. They go from claiming one absolute nonsense is the truth, and then they just change it for another nonsense when the last nonsense
they don't even realize they're moving them, I think. I don't even think they see the movement.
So the original lie about it being anti-fascists, which is a phrase they use to describe people who are actually anti-fascists, but it's somehow been turned into a pejorative. They were trying to make Trump look bad by pretending they were Trump supporters and doing the thing that Trump wanted his actual supporters to do, but they weren't doing it, despite the fact that Trump wanted them to do it. But it's the people who don't like Trump who did it, in the hope of making Trump look bad by doing the thing that he wanted his actual supporters to do.
Well, it's all perfectly logical.
Yeah. I've got that. That's crystal clear. Crystal clear.
Okay.
Thank you, Dorothy. You're not a fan of you're not a big J.D. Salinger fan by any chance, are you?
No.
Okay. I'm just checking because you're American, and I might be doing something on Sunday that involves hopefully knowing quite a lot about the books of J.D. Salinger, and I was going to get you to test me. But hey ho, on we go. Theo Ushwood is here.
Because, of course, 2 hours ago, Dominic Raab published a letter that he'd written to
Couldn't
the
see it.
Prime
I'm
Minister.
still blocked.
You can't see it?
I'm still blocked. I had to get it. Look, I've got it on paper.
Oh, right.
I'm still blocked. Can you believe I'm still blocked by him for telling for printing pictures, for actually publishing footage of him speaking. He got cross with me for showing him.
Okay, well, he's written to the Prime Minister to say that he's... you may have read some of this out, but this is important because he says, I've just been notified that 2 separate complaints have formally been made against me in parallel from my time as Foreign Secretary and my first tenure as Justice Secretary, which ended in September of this year. I am therefore writing to request that you commission an independent investigation into the claims as soon as possible. He says, I will cooperate fully and respect whatever outcome you decide. I remain committed to serving this government with integrity and professionalism as Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor, and welcome the opportunity to address any complaints transparently. The problem is, James, who is going to investigate? Because the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, Catherine Stone, she can't investigate because
it didn't happen in Parliament.
Because it didn't happen in Parliament itself.
Yes.
So you would then hand it over to an independent advisor on ministerial standards.
That's very helpful. Who is the current independent advisor on ministerial standards?
We don't have one.
What?
The government doesn't have one.
What?
They haven't appointed one.
What?
Rishi Sunak's yet to get round to it.
What?
But you would
Well,
think...
what about the one Liz Truss appointed? Why can't we just use him or her?
She didn't appoint one.
Well, what about the one that was in post when Boris Johnson was last Prime Minister? Why can't we just...
He resigned.
What? What about the one before the one who resigned?
He also resigned.
Oh, she's a problem.
So Rishi Sunak is, when he gets back from Bali and the G20, he is going to have to appoint a new independent advisor.
Is he, though?
Well, he said he would.
Did he?
He committed to...
Because Truss didn't, did she?
No.
And she didn't say she would?
No.
But he said he will?
Yes.
Right.
So he will appoint one. We assume he will appoint one. He may even appoint one on the plane back. He may even appoint one whilst he is in Bali.
Wouldn't fancy it.
And then that individual will carry out the investigation into 2 complaints to decide whether...
Two for now. There could be more coming, couldn't there? Because some of the reports are suggesting that even internal canvassing has found several people with grievances against Dominic Raab.
I think what's changed is, and this is from those I've spoken to around the civil service, is that they're making the point to me that Dominic Raab they're testing... This isn't just a test of Dominic Raab, this is a test of Rishi Sunak. This is a man who came in and said he is going to restore integrity and professionalism to government. Now is his opportunity to show that he is prepared to appoint somebody who has the wherewithal, who has the proverbial teeth to carry out a full investigation to determine whether civil servants who work at the behest of ministers and on their command and instruction, whether they have been bullied by ministers, in this case Dominic Raab.
By Dominic Raab. Is Dominic Raab now in the same position that Gavin Williamson was in when Gavin Williamson resigned, or are there differences between their two positions? Before you answer that, I just remind everybody listening that we will cross with little ceremony to the House of Commons as soon as Angela Rayner gets to her feet to pose PMQs to the Deputy PM, who is actually the bloke that we're talking about, who's now under investigation for bullying by an as yet unappointed independent ethics advisor. What was Williamson's status when he actually threw in the towel?
So from my recollection, and I'm prepared to be corrected if I'm wrong, there weren't any formal complaints.
No,
and that
so he was in less trouble than Dominic
But
Raab.
it was always Dominic Raab's assertion, and this was assertion, I should say, and of course Rishi Sunak, what he said on Monday, his spokesman said on Monday, was there was no formal complaint. So what can you investigate?
Right.
So you can, okay, there's an allegation.
But now there are formal complaints. So it's almost as if the bluff was called of some of the complainants, and they've now come forward and said, all right, then we'll go on the record.
Yes, but what's happened is you've now got Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister,
yes.
Whereas before, I think from what I'm
What's
picking
the
up...
point of coming forward? Even if they're found to have bullied me, Boris Johnson just tore it up, threw it away, and Alex Allen resigned when Priti Patel was found to be such a bully that they paid one of her victims £400,000, was it?
I don't know. I'm
well,
not
check, but it was check them before we say it on the radio.
But the point is, and I was told that there was a separate investigation. I was told,
yes.
But it wasn't even, you couldn't even call it an investigation necessarily. But there was a situation where a minister who was in Boris Johnson's government, there were allegations that were made, but they were never made in a formal complaint.
There's no point because they weren't going to go anywhere.
So they weren't going to go anywhere. So you end up in a situation where the civil servant has to go and find another job or end up leaving the civil service altogether, and that's the end of their career in the civil service.
But it's like working at Twitter.
But they, that then goes through an employment processes to determine whether they receive any
it's a tough gig, isn't it? Julie's pointing out that Sunak appointing the ethics advisor is like choosing your own judge. I don't think I'd go quite that far. But
no, they're independent. But that's the point.
I mean, that's why they resign when their reports aren't actually acted upon, and it will be from a relatively small pool of civil servants, will it, that this appointment is made?
You could appoint them from. I mean, it was Lord Guyot before.
Brian suggests Gavin Williamson's looking for a job at the moment. Perhaps he could do it.
But that's also the test for Rishi Sunak. Is he going to actually appoint somebody? And it may form some of the questions today from Angela Rayner,
we shall see.
Deputy Leader of the
we haven't done
Party.
any of that. Quickly, what do you think she's going to go in on?
Oh, she's going to go in on
the bullying allegations. Anything else?
And I'd imagine you'll expect Prime Minister's questions or Deputy Prime Minister's questions to be much more partisan.
Mm-hmm.
Dominic Raab is much more of a Conservative versus Angela Rayner, much more left of Keir Starmer. I'd imagine the cost of living crisis or cost of living situation would come into it. The economy, 11.1% on inflation announced today. That will feature heavily as well.
And a complete reversal next week, or tomorrow rather, of the last Conservative fiscal announcement.
Yes.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, when you think about it, it is absolutely unprecedented.
What's also noteworthy about tomorrow is the justification tomorrow is how badly it went the last time. So it's not just a reversal. It's saying, well, we need to do this because, the last lot was the Conservative government. Let's trust this government. That's why we need to do this. And that's
I've
unusual.
got some break. Hang on, I need to check. This is. Oh no, yes. Sunak has said yes to an investigation into Rob. Did we know that? There's another.
Has
letter.
he said? Has he said?
I thank you for your letter and the recommendation that the two formal complaints against. Let's cross live now to the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, and can I share the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks regarding the Sikh community and, most importantly, about the incident in Poland last night? I know the whole House stands united in our support for the Ukrainian people and sends condolences for the tragic loss of life. And Britain has an unshakable commitment to NATO and our allies, including Poland. The government has rightly requested we establish the facts and avoid unhelpful speculation, so I understand that the Deputy Prime Minister might not be able to go further today. But does he agree that last night's events aside, the fact that Russia is launching missile attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure whilst world leaders meet shows the utter contempt that Putin has for international order?
The Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Lady? I entirely agree with what she said. President Putin started this war, and whatever the determination made in relation to the events yesterday. They result, whether directly or indirectly, from the unlawful aggression perpetrated by the Russian government, and that's why the Prime Minister is out at the G20 rallying support, making sure we wean ourselves off energy dependence on Russia, making sure we make sure we've got the energy supply from other parts of the world, and I agree with what she said 100%.
Angela Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's right that we condemn Putin in his strongest terms. But the G20 is also an opportunity to work together to tackle the economic challenges we all face. Yet as our international allies race to crack down on multinationals using tax havens to stash profits abroad, this government is dragging its feet to protect their profits. We have a budget tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, where it's briefed that tough choices will be impacting on families across Britain. Does he accept that every pound hidden in tax havens is a pound lost from the pockets of working families?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady? I mean, look, we want people to come to this country to create the jobs and to generate the tax revenue. Whether it's non-dom status, which was stricter under this government, given the changes we made, than under the last Labour government. Whether it's the Prime Minister's approach to big tech companies, where he's led the charge with the G presidency in making sure there's an international approach and delivering global minimum corporate tax rules. We have lowered the tax gap, the difference between the tax owed and the tax raised, to the lowest level, certainly lower than under the last Labour government, and will continue to do so.
Angela Rayner.
I notice non-dom status hasn't been abolished, though, Mr. Speaker, and the Conservatives would have us all believe that the economic problems are out of their hands, when the truth is, Mr. Speaker, it's working people paying the price for their choices. They've chosen to protect corporate profits and not household incomes. There are 38 countries in the OECD two-year growth league table. Where does the UK rank in that table?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank her. She'll know that on the latest data, unemployment remains at a 50-year low. Well, she's saying the Shadows Chancellor is saying it's gone up. It's half the level left by the last Labour government. And when it comes to GDP, and when it comes to GDP, she'll know that the IMF has said that we will have the strongest growth in the G7.
Mr. Speaker, I think the economic situation families face speaks for itself. But I'll answer the question for the Deputy Prime Minister. The answer is 38 out of 38 on growth. If there was a World Cup for growth, we wouldn't even qualify. Working people are paying the price for 12 years of Tory failure. The wrong choices by the wrong people. Now, after days of dodging and denial, this morning, the Deputy Prime Minister finally acknowledged formal complaints about his misconduct. But his letter contains no hint of admission or apology. This is anti-bullying. This is anti-bullying week. Will he apologise?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Lady? Look, in terms of the economic challenges which are global, caused by COVID and the war in Ukraine, we've got a plan to grip inflation, balance the books and drive economic growth. If we listen to the Honourable Lady, debt would go up, unemployment would go up and working Britons would pay the price. She asked about the complaints. I received notification this morning. I immediately asked the Prime Minister to set up an independent inquiry into them. I'm confident I behaved professionally throughout, but of course I will engage thoroughly and look forward, Mr. Speaker, may I say, look forward to transparently addressing any claims that have been made.
So, Mr. Speaker, let me get this straight. He has had to demand an investigation into himself because the Prime Minister is too weak to get a grip. A Prime Minister in office less than a month, with a disgraced Cabinet Minister resigned with his good wishes, the Home Secretary who breached the ministerial code and risked national security still clings on, and now the Prime Minister defends his deputy whose behaviour has been described as abrasive, controlling and demeaning. with junior staff, Mr. Speaker, too scared to even enter his office. And that's without mentioning the flying tomatoes. The Deputy Prime Minister knows his behaviour was unacceptable. So what's he still doing here?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm here and happy to address any specific point she wishes to make. That never happened, she says from a sedentary position, and I will thoroughly rebut and refute any of the claims that have been made. She hasn't, in fact, put a specific point to me. If she wishes to do so, and this is her opportunity, I'd be very glad to address it.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe he just doesn't think there's a problem, or maybe he's suggesting that civil servants are liars. Now he's reportedly banned from meeting junior staff without supervision. While we await an inquiry the Prime Minister hasn't even instigated from a watchdog he hasn't even appointed. In the Prime Minister's letter, he did not say how and when this will be investigated or by who. No ethics, no integrity and no mandate, and still no ethics advisor. So when will they appoint an independent ethics advisor and drain the swamp?
Mr. Speaker, the recruitment of the new ethics advisor is already underway and taking place at pace. But may I say, Mr. Speaker, there's a reason that she's come to the dispatch box with her usual mix of bluster and mudslinging. It's because they don't have a plan. Mr. Speaker, we're helping people into work. She's in hock to the unions. We're protecting our borders. She voted against every single measure to control illegal immigration to this country. We're delivering cleaner growth and energy security. She wants to send billions in reparation payments abroad. The British people want a government that can deal with the real challenges, and they're not up to it.
Lucy Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hope House Children's Hospice provides dedicated end-of-life care to children from Telford and across Shropshire. This Sunday, Hope House is holding an online fundraiser called the Big Night In, and they aim to beat last year's target of £500,000. Among the fabulous prizes are premium tickets to the Telford Steam Railway Polar Express. Lucky winners will enjoy a Christmas adventure to the North Pole, complete with hot chocolate, cookies, golden tickets, and the first gift of Christmas from Santa, which is the reindeer's silver bell. Please will the Deputy Prime Minister log on to Hope House Children's Hospice Big Night In this Sunday, and if he's lucky enough to win a pair of tickets to the Telford Polar Express, I shall be delighted to go to the North Pole with him.
Someone want you to go though, be careful.
Can I thank my honourable friend and congratulate her and Hope House Children's Hospice for the amazing work they do. I've been working very closely with Shooting Star Child Hospices, which is a similar organisation in my constituency. If she ever gets bored of the trains, I jumped out of an aeroplane at 15,000 feet to raise money for Shooting Star. She'd find it a thoroughly enjoyable experience.
Deputy Leader of the SNP, Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I associate myself and my colleagues with the remarks made about the immense contribution of our Sikh communities. Mr. Speaker, the SNP extend our full support and condolences this morning to Poland following the death of two civilians last night, and while a full investigation is ongoing, we reiterate our calls for Russia to end its brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister was asked 6 different times to apologise for the disaster of the Tory mini-budget and the financial crisis it caused. And all 6 times he refused to say sorry. And now, this morning, people are waking up to the news that this Christmas they will be hit with the worst inflation in 41 years. So will the Deputy Prime Minister stand up today and do what his boss wouldn't? Will he say sorry?
Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for what she said both about Poland but also about the importance of our solidarity with the international community against the appalling illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Look, in terms of inflation, clearly that is a problem. I think as Chancellor and now as Prime Minister, and for months, it has been this Prime Minister who's been making clear that it is the number one economic challenge we face. We've got a plan to grip inflation, to balance the books, to drive economic growth, and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will be making a statement tomorrow, the autumn statement, which will set out our plan to take the Scottish people and everyone across the United Kingdom through these challenges.
Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if they can't even say sorry for the mess that they've made, what hope do we have of them fixing it? Because let's be clear, tomorrow's budget is imposing austerity 2.0 on all of our constituents. That is the political choice that the Tories are making.
Exactly.
But there are always different and better choices. Only this week, the Scottish Child's Payment rose to £25 a week. That's a 150% increase in 8 months, and it will help 400,000 children. So if the Tories won't say sorry for the mess that they have made, will they at least make the right choice for once? Will his government join the fight against child poverty tomorrow, follow the lead of the Scottish Government and match the Scottish Child Payment?
Deputy Prime Minister.
The Honourable Lady will know that we are facing challenges that are faced all around the world because of COVID, because of the war in Ukraine. We've seen rising inflation in Germany, in the Eurozone, in the US, but the reality is this Prime Minister and this Chancellor have a plan. We're going to have more detail set out in the autumn statement. But of course, the UK Government will continue to work with the Scottish Government collaboratively to safeguard and protect the most vulnerable right across the United Kingdom. And I think that's what the Scottish people expect.
Belper Mills in my mid-Derbyshire constituency are in a state of disrepair. The community is hugely worried about their future. It matters not just for my constituents but for the whole country because the mills are part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site in the UK. If appropriate redevelopment is not agreed soon, the site
step away there from live coverage of PMQs, although rest assured we shall return to it or bring it to your attention if anything significant happens. A little unfortunate, I think, for the Conservatives that the first MP on their feet after Dominic Raab was quizzed about bullying allegations was Lucy Allen, the MP for Telford, who was herself at the centre of some particularly pungent bullying allegations. I don't know how my memory works, but about 7 years ago, I think, was it? We shall possibly mention that when we catch up with Theo Usherwood after this and pick over the bones of this week's PMQs. 21 minutes after 12 is the time. Is this definitely happening? Is it 100% clear? Is it definitely happening? Oh, can I not tell everybody? I'm so excited about the full disclosure guest that's just been confirmed. We're doing it. Is it definitely happening? Okay. So I better not say anything then in case I jinx it. All right, okay. I'll hold
It's
on.
A good guess,
isn't it?
If it comes off,
isn't it? Just, I would like to do his catchphrase, but I'd have Ofcom all over me if I did. That would be a major problem. 21 minutes after 12 is the time. Theo Usherwood is still here. That was a bit of a curate's egg of a PMQs, wasn't it?
It was. Angela Rayner did come on to ask Dominic Raab about the two separate investigations of complaints against bullying against him. He asked Angela Rayner to come back with specifics and make the allegations, of course, at the dispatch box. And, of course, his calculation was that Angela Rayner wouldn't be able to come back with specific allegations other than the tomato throwing incident, and he said that, and this is new, I guess, that the ethics advisor, who of course would replace Sir Alex Allen, Lord Geit, the process to appoint them is taking place at pace, is already underway. So we should get news about who is going to be appointed to conduct those investigations fairly shortly so that they can carry out those investigations.
What did Lord Geit go over? You could do this on Mastermind, couldn't you? The scandals of Boris Johnson. It'd be far too much to study.
He stayed, didn't he, for much longer than many of us thought he was going to. It was an appearance before one of the select committees.
Yeah.
And he was asked, and he got himself into a tangle as to why
he hadn't gone sooner.
He hadn't gone sooner, and what it was that made him think that actually it would be worth hanging around. And at that point, it was the next day
almost as if he
decided to go.
It was almost as if he got out of the pressure cooker, wasn't it? And saw how he must look from outside the bubble, and thought, "Crikey, I've become part of. I've been radicalised almost by the corruption."
He went the day after, and quite a few of us were surprised that he decided to go just the next day, when in actual fact he'd stayed for so long. Now, there was also a question about this, and it was a good question from the Labour MP Clive Betts, which happened at the very start of PMQs, which we missed, but I think we can have a listen to it now, Keith.
Got the job in his first day, the Prime Minister promised, and I quote, integrity, professionalism and accountability.
Where is it?
I assume the Deputy Prime Minister agrees with that promise and would expect all ministers to follow such principles. Therefore, does the Deputy Prime Minister also agree that in line with his promise, the Prime Minister should ensure that no minister who has a complaint of bullying upheld against them should continue to serve in his government?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman and thank him for his shared solidarity on the issue in Poland. He's right to quote what the Prime Minister said, and I take it as an article of personal faith that we behave with absolute integrity and accountability. I am confident that I have behaved professionally throughout, but immediately I heard that 2 complaints had been made. I believe they were made yesterday. I was notified this morning. I immediately asked the Prime Minister to set up an independent investigation, and of course I will comply with it fully.
Did he answer the question?
No. He said he would comply.
He can't answer the question, can he?
No.
Because that would involve
an admission of...
No, he can't answer the question because Boris Johnson didn't fire Priti Patel after a complaint of bullying was upheld.
That is true.
And he was in that government as well.
Yes.
In fact, was he not Deputy Prime Minister?
He was Deputy. Yes, he was Deputy Prime Minister.
What a tangled web they weave. Someone's guessed who the guest is. Well done. That's incredible. Anyway, carry on.
But of course, the other point of what Clive Betts is trying to get to is that he's trying to get Dominic Raab to commit to resigning from his post as minister.
If it's upheld.
If it's upheld, as the Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary, if it's upheld. But of course, it would ultimately be a decision we would expect.
I think we're going to have one of our mild disagreements on this. I don't think he was evading answering the question because of his own situation. I think he was doing it retrospectively. Oh, God, Rees-Mogg's on his feet now. Haven't we suffered enough? I think he was doing it retrospectively because it would have made such a mockery of Johnson's refusal to sack Patel, which Raab went along with. I don't.
But there have been so many.
If there's an allegation against Raab that's upheld, he's toast, isn't he?
Yes.
Gavin Williamson went without any formal complaints actually being made. It was just
too much of a distraction.
Leaking and
too much of a distraction.
Yes. So I don't think he evaded that particular question for the reasons you suggest. I could be wrong. But we'll never know, will we? Because it's Dominic Raab. I can't even ask him on Twitter because he's blocked me.
But of course, the race is on for Rishi Sunak to appoint that advisor, and who the Prime Minister decides to appoint is absolutely key to this whole process. And you talk about it being a slightly odd PMQs, and it was because everything else, there's some questions about the windfall tax that actually the major energy companies don't pay very much of because they reinvest their money into oil and gas, so they don't pay that tax. Angela Rayner trying to draw that distinction about non-dom status. Of course, the tee-up is what we're going to get tomorrow with the autumn statement and the fact that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, has already said that we're all going to end up paying more taxes. Angela Rayner trying to frame this around being a political choice for the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, the fact we are going to have to pay more taxes because, and this is the argument from Labour, it's because of mistakes made by the Conservative predecessors of Liz Truss and, of course, Boris Johnson. And, of course, they wouldn't have to be doing this if they decided to do away with non-dom status or indeed actually close the loophole on the windfall tax so that you can't avoid paying the windfall tax by reinvesting profits into search exploration for oil and gas.
Has Raab done Rishi Sunak a disservice here, possibly? Because that accusation from Rayner that the Prime Minister is too weak to have called for an investigation himself, and Raab has had to call for one. I mean, to be fair, the complaints have only dropped in the last 24 hours.
Yes.
Sunak hasn't really, and he's at G20. G20 or G7?
G20.
G20. He hasn't had time to, arguably, he hasn't had time to actually...
Pressing matters as well.
Yeah, so by going public with it, Raab is protecting his own backside at the expense of Rishi Sunak, because it's exposed Rishi Sunak to this accusation of weakness, which is quite powerful.
I think there's probably quite a strong argument for that by acting quickly, Dominic Raab has sought to try and get on the front foot to say, listen, investigate, I'll cooperate fully. I don't think and he said it, didn't he, in the chamber, I don't think I'm confident that I'll be cleared of any bullying allegations. And of course, Rishi Sunak, by not implementing, or the Prime Minister's office, by not implementing the investigation themselves, as you say, might be portrayed, and this is the point Angela Rayner is making, to be rather flat-footed and slow, given it wasn't actually Dominic Raab who promised to uphold, to bring in a government of professionalism and integrity. It was Rishi Sunak who promised to bring in a government of professionalism and integrity.
It's a good, and accountability. It's a good line. Let me get this straight. He had to demand an investigation against himself because the Prime Minister is too weak to get a grip. It's a powerful line. But it wasn't a zinging PMQs, was it? It was probably the best from the Conservatives' point of view since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, which is slightly problematical from his perspective because he wasn't there.
But it didn't fly, and of course, and there was something, I think, in fairness to Dominic Raab, is to say, is the best you've got the flying tomatoes? Is that what it is?
I mean, to be fair, many people would be in a lot of trouble at work if they threw tomatoes at people, wouldn't they?
But Gordon Brown did throw mobile phones and staplers.
He did, yes, he did.
And so...
But people didn't lodge formal complaints about that.
No. Maybe it was a different time, or the fact that maybe those staplers and mobile phones were thrown with a different sense of frustration from the Prime Minister, or there was a difference in
Did he throw them at people, or did he throw them at walls?
I think he threw them at walls.
Yeah, there's a bit of a difference there as well.
But he threw the tomatoes onto a bag. Anyway, this is all going to be investigated. This is all going to be investigated by the soon-to-be ethics advisor. But the point is that Dominic Raab is saying, come up with something better to show that I'm a bully, and Angela Rayner didn't have something. And
she hasn't read the...
Well, we don't yet know of anything yet.
No. Watch this space. And Lucy Allen was in trouble for bullying, wasn't she? Or alleged bullying back in 2015. I'm pretty sure there was a recording of her leaving a message for someone who worked in her office who was ill. And she said something like, everyone knows you're not ill. So it was quite unfortunate that she was the one who got to her feet with some bizarre advert for hot chocolate after Dominic Raab had fended off accusations or allegations of bullying.
Yes, and of course, obviously somebody hasn't got to the timetable, the listing of questions in the table office in Parliament to perhaps think that maybe that wasn't the best way.
She was accused of vicious verbal abuse against members of her own staff. In phone calls heard by the Evening Standard, Lucy Allen ranted at a female staffer who was on sick leave, describing her absence as pathetic, telling her she can't say that word on the radio, and accusing her of having an alcohol problem. She said that she would sack the young woman if she took the time off that had been advised by her doctor, adding, "I'm not paying you for that then. It's ridiculous." Oh.
But part of the problem, of course, in Westminster, we go back to it, is in Parliament there is no HR department. Staffers are they're the employees of individual MPs, and that's often been the case, that there is nowhere to necessarily go to make a complaint if it happens in Parliament, but this didn't.
I remember that now. Thank you, Thea. It is 31 minutes after 12. I think we'll head back to the Trump question for a bit after this, and then I think Emily Maitlis and John Soper will be joining me to cast their expert eye over Trump's announcement that he's going to have another crack at the presidency, because there are very few people in the British media better qualified to comment on that question than those two. First, though, it's time for the very latest news headlines with Amelia Cox. 12:36 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, I do worry sometimes. Do you know what story we nearly did today? Part of me thinks we should have done, because the politics gets a bit samey. I worry sometimes that the questions of how can this be happening are all merging into one. That parallels between Trump and Johnson. How can this be happening? How can we be letting someone stay in power? And then, of course, more importantly, how can people be okay with this stuff? How can people be okay with this corruption, with these lies, with the parties? People still making excuses about the fact that Boris Johnson's Downing Street was like Stringfellows. With all the partying going on, while the rest of us weren't even allowed to visit our mums in their own homes. And then the question of how can Trump be running again after he essentially launched a coup, or tried to launch a coup. His followers turned up at the Capitol baying for the blood of his own vice president and other politicians as well. There's just a quick reference to Idiot's Corner. The guy saying that they weren't baying for Mike Pence's blood obviously didn't see the gallows that I think had been constructed with his name on them. It's quite incredible, really, some of the stuff that unfolds. But I have to be a bit careful. I can't ask the same question every day. But I keep asking it as long as we have interesting answers. And we had loads, didn't we? Not least from Bo, who works as a broadcast journalist in Philadelphia and has to walk this tightrope of so-called balance between what is actually happening and what could be construed or accused of bias. I'll refer again to this brilliant line from NPR. This is how you do a headline. Donald Trump, who tried to overthrow the results of the 2020 presidential election and inspired a deadly riot at the Capitol in a desperate attempt to keep himself in power, has filed to run for president again in 2024. And you can't stop him from doing that unless he's in jail, which arguably he should be. But how can he do that, secure in the knowledge that tens of millions of people will support him? Almost certainly not enough to get him the White House, but possibly enough to get him the actual nomination. Explain it to someone who fell asleep on the night of January the 6th with a sense of relief that the gig was finally up, that the con of Donald Trump was finally over, that the scales would surely fall from all but the most devoted fans' eyes and they could see Trump for what he was, an absolutely poisonous political presence. It's almost as if he did go out and shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, albeit that he wasn't holding the gun himself, without losing a single vote. Explain it to me. Tom's in Austin in Texas. Tom, what have you got?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello,
I want to give you a piece of history and I want to give you a data point. I think to the point you raised about balance, I think we have to go back to 1987 in America, when the Federal Communications Commission withdrew what was known as the Fairness Doctrine. That was a law that meant that news stations had to present balanced views. Oh. That is why you now have Fox News and One American News and Newsmax on the right and arguably CNN on the left presenting
is that
views.
You're in the States, I'm not. Is that fair? Does CNN actually? I mean, I don't see them as yin and yang at all. I watch a little bit of CNN. They're not. I mean, what would be the liberal equivalent of telling lies about an election result? It would be telling the truth, Tom. So I don't quite see the comparison, if you see what I mean.
My point isn't about whether or not they tell the truth. I think my point is that they don't have to present any sort of.
Yeah, I balk at this portrayal of CNN as being yin to Fox's yang because the truth has no bias. If CNN report what happened in the last election, Trump fans think they're biased, but they're clearly not. But I take your point, and I'm splitting hairs. Carry on.
And your point about NPR was brilliantly made. That tweet they put out this morning was the perfect sort of balanced argument. But I think there's a really interesting data point here, which is the US Department of Education released some statistics last year, which said that 54% of the American population have literacy levels of that of a sixth grader. So that puts them at about the age of 13. So 54% of Americans arguably perhaps don't have the critical thinking skills that are required to be able to decipher the sort of information and news, in inverted commas, that they're getting from Fox News or One American News or Newsmax. That is a vast swathe of the population who are being fed this kind of information, literally kind of being brainwashed. I have first-hand experience of that with my parents-in-law, who sit glued to Fox News every single day and will regurgitate every piece of information that they are given. They have no ability to be able to kind of critically assess that information and to listen to the other side of the argument because they are being told it's right.
Are they poorly educated?
No, they are very...
Because I was thinking of Ginny Thomas as well, the wife of the Supreme Court Justice, who was quite vocal in her support for some of the lies that led up to January the 6th. It's part of the answer, isn't it, in terms of the base, is poor education on the numbers. But the people I'm most fascinated in are the ones like your in-laws who are educated. They've been radicalised by an absence of challenging voices, perhaps.
I think that's a very fair way of putting it. Radicalizing that base is what has enabled Trump to come back and give him the opportunity to run again.
Are they rooting for him, Tom? Are your in-laws rooting for him?
Funnily enough, they've actually moved on from Trump. They think he's yesterday's man. Their new hero is Ron DeSantis. Because he is portrayed as a slightly more sensible, slightly more calm version of Trump. So I think that's where their votes are going to be going. But these are also people who look at what Marjorie Taylor Greene does and say she represents our country well. So it's kind of scary when you're having that sort of conversation with people that you love.
Well, I'm glad you used the word love, because I presume that you just follow that old advice about not talking about politics or religion at the dinner table, do you?
We have to. I have to do the same thing with my father back in the UK about the B word. So
do you still?
I have it on both sides of the Atlantic. Oh,
wow!
Yeah.
You're like the needle on a compass with several magnets in the room, aren't you? That's tricky. But that's a helpful insight. I didn't know that about the Federal Communications Commission. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And you can see why political movements in this country against news outlets like the BBC and Channel 4 gain popularity with the sort of British equivalents of Marjorie Taylor Greene and her cohorts, although it would be unfair to mention any names at this point. Nadine Dorries. Charles is in Leeds. Charles, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
hi, mate. I think there's obviously a number of factors that lead into something like this being able to happen. But I think if you look at the media landscape, like the previous caller just mentioned, the politicians themselves and the judicial system, it all kind of ties in to show why he can, get away with trying to run again. So if you look at the politicians after January the 6th in the House, you had Lindsey Graham, Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, all standing up saying, we're done with Trump, no more, I'm off the Trump train. But then with the new influx of the MAGA Republicans like Marjorie Greene, Lauren Boebert, and the existing nutters like Paul Gosar and Matt Gaetz, they gave it an air of legitimacy, and which leads into the fairness doctrine. That on Fox News, they can just lie.
Yeah.
So you have politicians going on there saying it wasn't a riot, it was peaceful protesters, it was Antifa, etc., etc.
Is that still going on? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know, because Fox News, like the previous caller said, is starting to move away a little bit to Ron DeSantis.
But it's gone, and it's been reported that Murdoch's told Trump that he's not going to support him, and some people are tempted perhaps to think, oh, well done, Murdoch. But my God, it's over 18 months since the coup attempt.
Yeah, well, I mean, you see the headlines that they put on the New York Post, the Trumpty Dumpty and
I saw that.
Fire. So yeah, they are trying to move away. But because of the landscape where people don't get the news from cable news, like Fox News isn't news, obviously. And it's if you've got...
But they think it's news. The people who watch it think it's news.
They do. And there's all the opinion piece hosts like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, they just spout whatever lies they want. But then you've got your YouTube algorithms, your Facebook algorithms pushing people down these rabbit holes, 4chan and whatever.
Yeah, that's the point I think that old gits like me miss, is that so much of it is... Fox is almost a symptom as much as it's a cause, and the stuff that you're finding, the QAnon stuff, came straight out of 4chan and then latterly 8chan, I think, which Gabriel Gatehouse did a fascinating one of his episodes of his The Coming Storm, had a look at that, which was, genuinely breathtaking, and it hardly gets a syllable in what we call mainstream reporting on this side of the Atlantic, never mind the other side of the Atlantic. Charles, thank you. 12:45 is the time. After this, we'll talk to two journalists who probably did more than anyone else in this country to chronicle the every twist and turn of American politics over the last few years, and who have rather fortuitously washed up relatively recently on these shores at LBC. So Emily Maitlis and John Sopel will be talking us through the significance of Donald Trump's announcement and the possible ramifications of it after this. 10-1 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, joined by two of my relatively recent colleagues, John Sopel and Emily Maitlis. You've got your feet under the table now. News agents is going...
say relatively lovely or relatively close or something like that.
No, we're
relatively talented.
We're scrupulously impartial on this programme, as you'll both be very familiar with. But News Agents, the new podcast that you're doing here at Global, is going great guns.
2.5 months old. This morning,
1 and 2 in the charts.
1 and 2. We're very happy with that.
So all good.
And it is it's a cracking listen.
Thank you.
An appointment to listen.
As are you.
Well, we try, don't we? We try. But, of course, your first sort of high-profile collaboration was on a podcast dedicated to American politics, which is why you've kindly agreed to talk to me about the significance. I'll start with you, Emily. The significance of Trump's announcement yesterday and the possibility that he might have postponed it given the unexpected disappointment of the midterms from his point of view.
It was teleprompter Trump, wasn't it, last night, 3 o'clock this morning for some of us. And it was very on message. And it was quite, I thought, subdued. If you compared what he sounded like when he was in Ohio backing one of his candidates, J.D. Vance, there was the energy and there was the shout and the mass. And this time it had that sort of slightly Temazepam feel to it, I thought, like he was going to do it because he had to. He was like one of those parents that's been told, you've got to follow through. If you said you'll do something, you've got to follow through. Everyone around him was telling him not to do it. They were saying it's like launching off the Hindenburg's just gone down. It's the worst possible time to do it. He knows that. He was making up numbers about the people he'd supported and whether they'd won or not. I mean, the blunt truth is the swing seat races where his candidates were standing did not perform well. And yet he had to come out and do that because he'd trailed it. It's the worst thing ever when you've said you're going to do something and you're made to stand there and do it. But it didn't feel like his heart was quite there. Which
speaks of the confidence he must have had, John, that the polls were right. So what happened? What went wrong? There's one theory I've heard I quite like is that they completely discount anybody under 30 because nobody under 30 would ever answer a call from an unknown number, which is probably not quite
100% right.
It's probably part of the problem, isn't it, or part of the issue?
Do you know what? The pollsters are taking a bit of a victory lap, and they're saying we did get it right. We were actually the ones who said there wasn't going to be this red Republican wave and they were going to sweep to control of the House and the Senate. I think what's happened is, as Emily said, that if you look at certain states where there were races played out, where there was, a race for the governor, and the governor wasn't a Trump-supporting person, they did pretty well. But where the Senate candidate, and it's the same electorate voting, was a Trump supporter, they did badly. That happened in Georgia. That happened in Wisconsin. And so it's really interesting that you can make the calculation that Trump did badly in that election, and Trump supporters. Now, his name may not have been on the ballot, but Trump backed...
Everybody knew.
But everybody knew. And what's really interesting is that I think the reason why Trump has gone, as Emily said, I've said it, so I've got to do it. And I think that, Trump doesn't want to look weak. But equally, I think, one, it means that he can raise a lot of money still. Two, he makes himself the centre of attention, Donald Trump's favourite place in the whole world to be. But three, and consider this, there is a lot of legal jeopardy that Donald Trump is facing now, not just the normal kind of writs that are flying. This is the Department of Justice potentially, taking him to court. I think an Attorney General would be incredibly bold to decide to take action against someone who is running to be the next president.
I'm going to take issue with that because there is absolutely no immunity provided for somebody who is standing for candidate. And I think it's really important to recognise that the American Constitution doesn't have any recognition of somebody who is a post-president. There's no office of post-president. There's no office of running for president. Yes, when it gets close to the election, when you're about a month out, 3 weeks out, then you might find people unwilling to step in. But I'm not sure it should or would enter a calculation.
This is our podcast where we just disagree with each other. I tell you what, I think that's wrong. I think that the idea that everyone is equal before the law is a great idea in principle. You would have to take into account the political calculation of launching a legal case against an ex-president and someone who is running to be president again. And I think the idea that the Department of Justice and the Attorney General are immune from what the consequences of that would be is for the birds.
Because they have personal and even political ambitions of their own, which would come into play.
Look, don't forget, when he was facing impeachment, right?
The first time or the second time?
Either time, his own supporters were saying, this is not the place. There are courts of law that can settle this. This is not the place. Impeachment's a very political, he called it a witch hunt. There are courts and there are criminal, allegations. This can all be settled outside. Now it is. He's facing, 4, 5 different legal suits. And actually, the idea that you could just say, I'm running, and everything gets dropped, I think is ridiculous.
Okay.
I mean, I think you couldn't, as the Attorney General, stand there and...
Sorry. You can return to this theme later on the newsagents. I want to know from you, John, from your time in the States with the Beeb as the American editor, is there any way to tell post-lie who was going along with it for reasons of ambition and who actually believed it,
I think you can discern that. I think there are the true believers who decided that the election was stolen and they absolutely bought into everything that Donald Trump was saying. And there were those who thought it was expedient. And that was not because they wanted to get on with Donald Trump. It was because they were terrified of Donald Trump. And they felt unless they bought into this ridiculous story that the election had been stolen, Donald Trump would come and kill them. And more or less, he did.
Yes.
Anyone who stood up against Donald Trump found themselves being what they call primaried, i.e. they were challenged about whether they could stay in their seat, and invariably they lost. And all those people who said Donald Trump lied, he lost the election, now find themselves either retiring and leaving politics or have been forced out.
Interesting.
Isn't it extraordinary, though, that we are talking about Trump no longer having that sort of, magnetism to him? The straw that broke the camel's back wasn't that he actually tried to overturn an elected government. It wasn't that there was an assault and attempted coup on the Capitol. It was a political calculus whereby he didn't seem to be winning anymore. Think of all the acolytes. Think of all the enablers around him. That's what this story is about. It's not even about Trump. It's about those who've put him in power.
Up to and including Rupert Murdoch, who of course didn't pull the rug from under Donald Trump after the attempted coup or after the deaths on January the 6th or after any of that, but has now reportedly. How significant is that, Emily?
Do you remember? I mean, OK, this sounds really nerdy, but I remember over the 2020 election, on that night, it was Fox News that called Arizona for Biden, and Trump got really angry. And it was the first sort of hint that they were going to, start to pull away and start being the sort of the news channel rather than the acolyte channel. Now, the New York Post, also owned by Rupert Murdoch, has shown a whole variety of front pages, including that recent one about Humpty Dumpty, the Trump falling off the wall, and wasn't that a mess, and he never built the wall. But last night, they did stay on it longer. Fox News stayed on the Trump speech longer than anyone else. I don't think Murdoch has made up his mind. I think he'll wait to see if he's a winner.
Which way the wind is blowing, and if he looks winningy enough, then there could be another change underway. John Sopel, Emily Maitlis, thank you so much. The newsagents. What time does it drop roughly for people?
Well, roughly
5 o'clock-ish.
Every day.
Drive time,
roughly.
But sometimes the train gets delayed, when you're trying to commute home. Leaves on the line, exactly.
I should say, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, that you're both working on incredibly hard on it. It shows in the quality of the product and indeed in the popularity of the product. But there is sometimes when big beasts come over to LBC, then those medium-sized beasts that are already here, we worry a little that you might be just coming.
Stop it! Methinks he doth protest.
You might be coming to do a sort of lap of honour or something like that. Or
we will never be in your zoo, you huge beast.
The graph that you're putting in is an example to us all, and of course it's paying dividends, which you can listen by subscribing to newsagents, which you can get.
Penguin biscuit.
You can get from Global Player.
Club bar on the way out.
It's 12:59. I should remind you that if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also get hold of the Newsagents podcast, as well as all of LBC's shows to catch up on. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4, Tom Swarbrick, but now on LBC is Sangeeta Maiska. She 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 is Sangeeta